All right, welcome to the Sae Bae cast number 188 with Mod Arcane for his second appearance after over 3.5 years. Mod Arcane, how are we doing today?
Yeah, pretty good. Apologies for anyone watching if I sound a little under the weather, but just coming back from a cold. But yeah, nice to be back after quite a while, like 3.5 years. I've been at Jagex for almost 4.5 years now. It's kind of weird. I feel like a veteran almost, but then equally, I'm still surrounded by people that have worked at Jagex for like 10, 15 years, so I still feel like a baby as well. Um, yeah, bit of a weird point of view.
It is weird that it's been 4.5 years since you've been there. I mean, seriously, it's like, at what point are you the veteran? Is it like the 5 year
Don't know.
mark or whatever? Like that's already so long to be working there. But
Yeah, I think my jobs before this, I had been there for like a year, like a two and a push. So for me to be at a job for like 4.5 years already feels like, how am I not bored yet? How have I not moved on? Because it's generally what I was like. But yeah, I also feel like I'm getting fairly competent at the job. Like I can feel that like progression. I don't just feel like a newbie anymore, which is quite reassuring.
that's so good to hear. And I mean, you've basically, in my opinion, have been killing it there since you got there, basically. Like the updates you've provided for the game have been absolutely amazing. Now, I of course was a high level Iron Man for I'm playing like a hardcore grouper now, so I'm experiencing the early game again, but like for so many years, it's just been camped at high level bossing and what you did in particular with Fasani's Nightmare for those that don't know, like that saved Nightmare. I mean, Nightmare was in the worst spot of all time, and it was saved. So I see you as like my savior in a little segment of the game. So yeah, I'll always be
Good to hear.
appreciative of that.
I think Nightmare was my first proper PVM project, but even then, I'm not even sure I'd call it a proper PVM project since it's just kind of mashing up something that already exists, right?
Yeah,
But it was the first thing I felt like I sunk my teeth into, is just change on a substantial level.
it's just wild to me how much you could save that boss without completely scrapping it. Because in so many ways, it had failed to reach that mark that I'm assuming the devs, you guys wanted
Mm.
to hit. And I think the reasons at the time, like you guys said, was just you tried to do way too much at once, and it kind of felt mediocre on every single level. Like the drop rates, the chip damage, the trying to appeal to the lower players as well as the higher players, and then the scaling was just a mess. And I think Fasani's and what's tough about it is I don't think Fasani's even now with the drop rate improvements is still in the best spot ever. But the thing is, and I see it because I've talked to like J mods, is you guys have to balance this game with not just one group of players in mind or
Yeah,
one, ideology. Like you have to kind of balance this without breaking things and trying to achieve a good balance. So I think honestly, you guys did the best you possibly could, and Fasani's on release was just amazing. I was so addicted to it. Like it felt so good to fight it.
a cool fight. I think the only thing I'd probably do in retrospect is probably make it a little bit shorter. I think it's still probably just on the maybe like a minute or two too long. Was
Yeah.
the encounter to the point where it gets a little bit tiring. It is quite exhausting doing that content. Nowhere near compared to like old solo Nightmare, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Then, you know,
No, I mean, you're right though. I mean, but that's the balancing that you kind of if you had just went straight into a 4 minute Fasani's fight, let's say, from where it was, where like getting a 15-minute kill was seen as extremely fast, that would have been seen as okay, you did way too much. This is way too easy. You said this was going to be a harder encounter, and this is actually a lot easier. Because in my opinion, having done so much normal solo Nightmare, going to Fasani's genuinely felt easier. Like some mechanics actually became easier, like the husks being one shot, the parasite being one
yeah,
shot. Like that felt really good. And I mean, it still is a harder fight, I guess, ultimately because you could just get like one banged a lot easier. But
it's a lot
yeah,
more punishing, right? But
hmm
I guess when it's a slot, I guess regular Nightmare was punishing because it was such a stamina test. Like if you made a lot of small mistakes, you would just run out of supplies, right? But for Frosanis, you just kind of get one shot almost.
yeah,
Unless
yeah.
you're camping 99.
And I think I may have been a bit jaded because I had just done like 9 months straight of normal Nightmare. So the Fasani's fight probably to me just felt relatively easy. But for the average person that's
Not many
jumping in there
people in that
blind,
part.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, but I do appreciate that, and that is where I started getting a lot of hope for PVM, just in general. I think with the Nightmare coming out, I was a bit concerned. I think just depending on the updates, it's the same thing with skilling, in my opinion. Like if we get a mediocre skilling update, it makes me a little bit concerned. But then when we get a banger of a drop, like I would say Guardians of the Rift was just a straight up banger, that gives me a lot of hope. And it makes me realize like the J mods really do understand the community. They understand what's going to be fun and engaging for, long grinds. Like, if it's surpassing 30, 40 hours, trying to keep you engaged. So,
think,
yeah.
yeah, that year or two almost, I think, was a little bit rough. Like, I think everyone kind of fell out across the game. They released a few PVM updates that didn't really hit the mark, a few skilling updates. So there was a lot of like system work with like group Iron Man and clans and stuff where it didn't really feel like main game content. Obviously, Leagues was big at the time, but again, not main game content. So for people that weren't really interested in a lot of those systems, it kind of just felt a bit void for a while. But I do think we've definitely made a big upswing in the past couple of years and had stronger updates, more plentiful updates, higher quality updates, etc. Obviously, not everyone will agree. There's going to be certain communities that feel underrepresented, but we're still trying to do better on that and identify those communities and have a wider variety of updates.
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head. Just like that's exactly how it felt for a couple years. Just kind of these system updates and stuff. I mean, yeah, just kind of getting the systems to a better place where you could provide like better updates. I gotta say right now, Varlamore, especially starting the early game again, Varlamore has been the most amazing update ever. Like just in like across the board, and I'm so excited for part 2 and part 3 because just adding that variety, adding different routes to take that early / mid game is just so much what this game needs. And I was so blinded by it for so long. But I wasn't ever a player that was like shitting on, mid game updates and stuff. I know there is. I mean, I follow a lot of like late game, end game players on Twitter, and you see the general consensus repeated of just why are we introducing a warped scepter? We already have a trident. Like, what are you doing? Like, what is all this? But introducing a bunch of different routes with a bunch of cool little weapons that actually could become meta at certain stages of the game, now I see are very beneficial for the health of the game. So
I think early mid game, I don't want to say Iron Man because it kind of applies to most accounts. It just like even more so on an Iron Man, right? Because you're forced to do a lot more content or a lot more varied content. I think that's the most fun part of the entire game. Like, there's just so much to do, there's so much variety. You're constantly doing like a new grind every day. Things don't really even feel like a grind. I think that's where the game's at its best. And I think things like that, Temporos, even Gauntlet to a certain extent back in the day, obviously Varlamore, like you mentioned, just that variety about like how you approach the entire like early mid game is just so fun. Even like quests can do that, right? Like you doing that no dialogue quest in Karen. I can't remember what it's called. Garden of Death. Like it gives so much farming XP, and like that just feels satisfying to do as an early game account and just skip a bunch of levels.
Yep.
There's so many small things like that. I'm really excited to start a new account at some point and like go through all that because I've not, to be honest, I've not really played too much RuneScape in the past years. I've been very much trying out a lot of different stuff, going through the backlog.
Yeah.
But I'm excited to come back and actually start a new account and experience all of this fresh content that I missed. I think that's something that kind of beautiful about RuneScape in a way where it kind of just gets better over time. Obviously, some people will disagree, like devalue X and Y, but I think a lot of the content enhances the rest of the game rather than detracting from it in a lot of ways. So you can come back after a couple of years and experience it in a completely new light.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I would even expand on that and say that I feel like me starting a new account, I was a bit worried about the early game feeling like an entirely different experience to what I experienced on my first Iron Man. And no, I mean, you still get all the nostalgia, but you just get these added things that are like, oh, I could take this route, or I could do, I could go to Varlamore, or I could do this and kind of like, just mix up how I've seen the early game. But you still get so many of the classic grinds that, old time players are going to definitely enjoy. And I think you guys have struck like the perfect balance of just still keeping, at least in my eyes, Iron Man really. I don't know. You've just kept all the good nostalgia, but there's still just other routes to take, and it's just so cool. One of the things, though, that I would say is important to, or let me, if I were to make a new account, so I'm playing this new account, but if I were to make another one, I would want to wait until Varlamore Part 2 and 3, and preferably the run energy change that I'm assuming is going to be happening. Do you have any like info on the run energy change, what the team's been thinking about? Because obviously there was a blog post talking about it, and I think you guys are still looking at like revamping it, sort of like changing how you're approaching
Yeah.
it.
I was quite involved very early days in it. I think it was one of my game jams from like 2022 or something to propose the whole like run energy changes as well as a bunch of general agility changes, which actually has come through Project Rebalance. Like a lot of that stuff came through then. But yeah, we haven't managed to put the run energy stuff into the game yet. And that's primarily because we had that beta and it got a lot of mixed feedback and it wasn't quite there. And I think from my point of view, I'm not fully involved with it anymore, but from my point of view and the feedback that I have seen is that on some ends it feels like it's too much of a change where it just completely trivializes run energy and some players aren't really a fan of that. But then equally on the other end, it doesn't feel impactful enough. Like if you're still low level when you're carrying around a decent amount of weight, it still feels quite oppressive. Um, I definitely think there's just a room for like a flat buff in some ends. It's just really hard to buff it at the lower end and not the higher end without furthering the issue of agility feeling unrewarding to level, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
there's two issues that we were trying to solve. One is making the early game like experience of running not feels awful because it is just genuinely terrible. Like you're walking everywhere pretty much, so you get a decent amount of teleports. Um, and then the other issue is making agility actually feel rewarding to level. And it's hard to do both of those without making run energy completely trivialized at the top end.
Yeah, it's a really tough thing to balance. And as soon as you start adjusting things and I mean, because there's people that are talking about, just make it so when you have 99 agility, you have unlimited run. But like, that's not the move because what's the point of stams or any sort of weight reducing gear?
I think
Yeah.
it's like that sentiment by itself, I don't like fully disagree with, right? Like you master the skill, you should be able to run everywhere. Like I don't fully disagree with that.
Mm-hmm.
As much, but it's like the implications that it has actually get kind of awkward. So it's like imagine 99, you have 100% run energy. What does 90 look like? Is that like you have 90% uptime? You only need to walk 10% of the time or something? Like at what point does it become actually relevant again? Is it like as soon as you're 98, you need to bring a stamina into chambers now? Probably not. It's going to scale fairly naturally. I don't think we're going to make it so it's just as soon as you're 99, you just got infinite run energy. That'd probably feel a little bit arbitrary. And then it's like, what does that scale actually look like all the way down to 70? Um, is it still relevant at 70? Is it not relevant at 70? It doesn't scale very nicely. It's like kind of the limitation of our tile-based game. We don't have much flexibility in that. And that's kind of why the proposal was trying to make it so the base run energy is so much higher, but then weight matters a lot more. So it's like, yeah, generally you've got probably infinite run energy as long as you're not carrying around loads of stuff. But the reality is, people doing endgame PVM with a tribrid setup are bringing lots of stuff. It's very heavy, so you're suffering in that regard. Obviously, early game, if you're just trying to mine iron ore, you're still carrying a lot of stuff. The game's not really built to have a nice weight system. In reality, it's not. It's not like every item in RuneScape's had a conscious weight put in mind, going like, yeah, this is an appropriate weight at this point in the game with this agility level. It's not really set up like that. In terms of like what the next steps are, they're going to be another beta spun up at some point, most likely. Try out some new things, see what people think. Worth it considering the whole like if there's like an in combat run energy versus out combat run energy, like would that feel okay? Does that feel a bit too arbitrary or complicated? Do we just accept that the top end is like completely trivialized? Maybe that's just the lesser of two evils, right? Where we make it so yeah, you don't need stamina once you're 90 plus agility, unless you're like really, really heavy or something. Um, Maybe we just accept that. Um, People are quite extreme, saying like, yeah, just delete stamina potions from the game. No one wants to walk, and I get that it's not a fun part of gameplay, but no one wants to take damage either. But we're not going to just take hit points out of the game, right? Like, there's things in the game to interact with. It's an MMO. It's got an economy. It's got skills that feed into each other. We can't just start deleting things because they're not convenient for us at all times. We would rather introduce good solutions rather than just delete them, right?
Yep.
Maybe that means we should introduce a better stamina potion or something that requires better supplies, better resources, and makes it even better. Maybe we should actually make staminas easier to make so that people on the lower end can actually consume them more often. We did actually talk about that with super energies and energy pots. Should we just drastically buff those so they have like pseudo stamina effects? Maybe that would alleviate a lot of the lower or early game concerns. There's a lot of ideas been thrown around. I'm not sure what the current plans are.
Yeah, I mean, I think just a few ideas, just because I have been walking everywhere for the past month, and I actually so one thing is we've always seen extended pots come into the game, so extended stamina pots. Those I can definitely imagine coming out, and maybe instead of 2 minutes, they're 4 minutes, and then you just have the other thing I would love to see. This is like a separate sort of tangent on the run energy. Is I would love to just see you be able to go above 100. Just maybe maybe it doesn't it's not like camp there, but something like an extended stamina or just staminas in general can boost you up to like 150. And then as soon as you drop below 100, if you're not under the stamina effect, it won't go above 100 again. But at least you're going to get what sucks the most is, like, for example, when I was killing Duke, I would bring a bunch of stams there, and then all of a sudden you're at 100 run energy and your stamina is still going, but it's not giving you any effect because you've already capped out. So it would be cool to feel like you're continually getting a boost. In regards to early game, I completely agree that energy pots and super energies could have some mild form of stamina effect, maybe not as strong. But man, when you bring like 4 normal energy pots and realize it's only 160 run and you're just chugging them basically,
it's nothing, man.
Yeah, it really is nothing. So if those had a little effect, that would be amazing. And I also think, who knows how useful this would actually be, but I really enjoyed the Reddit idea of having pubs around the game act as a super quick energy rejuvenation area where you just stand there. Maybe you're getting 5x the run energy restore, and maybe even the bartenders could sell, a one-time special stamina mix. If you're like a new adventurer, you just dropped in town, here you go, here's your little stamina mix. So there's almost a reason to go stop off at the pub if you're doing questing on an early level account. Something fun like that. I don't know how useful it would be ultimately, but I think
I love the thematic of it, right? And like, I think everyone will agree that it's just a cool idea. I think I'm not fully sold on the practicality of like, oh, I hate walking around everywhere. Let's just stop moving in this pub for a couple of minutes while my energy runs back. Like, that's just gonna feel awful. But I think if you could make it into more of an active thing, like, yeah, maybe there's an NPC you interact with. Maybe if you talk to someone and just give them a bit of money, they just give you your energy back, right? Like, it's a bit more fast paced. Maybe that's fine. But yeah, I don't think the sitting down and resting at a campfire really solves the issue. People would rather just carry on walking, right, and just recover your energy naturally. Even if it's 5x, 10x, like, you'd have to go crazy to make that actually not feel like a waste of time.
There was another idea I heard. I think this was like a year ago or something. Somebody in my Twitch chat said it. But you know how there's beds in RuneScape in random houses?
Yeah.
Can we just get a right-click option where it's like rest, and it's just a one-tick rest, full run energy, but you have to like go into a house and right-click a bed. You actually
I feel like I've seen a JMod do that for a game jam project at some point.
Really?
Like a joke. But I'm not sure where it's at or if they're planning on pushing it forward. But I saw someone actually working on that.
I just think it would be so cool because then all of a sudden houses have a little bit of use. You see a bed in a house and you're like, okay, I need this run energy bed. I'm gonna sneak into this house and just.
That's so
sleep.
invasive, though, dude. Just like, should you get thieving XP for that? Successfully slept in a stranger's bed.
Oh yeah, totally should. In fact, you should probably have a thieving level to get into the house in the first place, or I don't know, something like that.
Power cooking.
Yeah. There's so many fun things. I mean, because there really are just a bunch of abandoned buildings. And if there was some use, that would be kind of cool. I don't know. Just here and there.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's speaking of thieving, actually, now you mentioned it, I've been doing some Varlamore thieving, and this is kind of a meme at this point, but I understand that Leagues introduces a lot of fun ideas that really do feel good for the game. I mean, the three of the things are, run energy rebalancing, stackable clue scrolls potentially, and this auto pickpocketing feature. So Varlamore thieving, for those that don't
Yeah.
know, it's like you get this every 90 seconds or so, you get a 30-second window where a child distracts one of the rich citizens, and you just get an auto pickpocket for like 30 seconds, and it's great. It honestly feels great. So yeah, I wonder if you guys are like slowly just drip feeding us that. Just here we go. We're going to introduce it very carefully into the game, but ultimately, it's not really a bad thing. I think it's actually healthy.
That's the thing. It's nothing like there's nothing inherently bad about auto pick. It's just that if we rolled it out to the entire game as it was, that would have huge balance implications, right? That
Mm-hmm.
would completely disrupt the entire thieving meta. Obviously, everyone's wrists would love it, like, objectively. But just simply rolling it out like that isn't really what we can do, unfortunately. Like, if we did it alongside rebalancing a bunch of stuff, sure, but then it's a massive project and might have some considerations that players aren't really up for. But yeah, when we introduce new content, if we see an appropriate way of just alleviating the wrist pain, then why wouldn't we go for it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do it in an appropriate way.
Are there any like hot takes that you have personally as a developer that you would like to see introduced into the main game? Maybe League's ideas, or maybe just unpopular things that you actually think would be beneficial for the game's health?
It's definitely too late now, and I'm not proposing this would ever happen, or I'm advocating for it at all. But I think pets, as a concept, should have either been 5 times more common or 20 times rarer. And like my thought process for that is that I think right now most pets are in this awkward little spot where they are incredibly rare, but they're still achievable for an individual. They're still in that realms of like, yeah, I could grind for that. It's gonna take me 30, 40, 100 hours, but that's a reasonable thing for RuneScape somehow. But if they were 20 times rarer, I think you're putting them in like the 200 mil category of like, yeah, most people are just never gonna bother going for that, right? But you still get the prestige of it when someone gets it. Oh my god, that's insane! That's so cool. And you might just randomly get one. It still has that entire effect, right? Maybe you only get one or two of them throughout your entire account, and like you still get that excitement. But then it's not that like everyone just can go like, yeah, I got the pet from like these 14 bosses, and like they're just grinding through them all.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that I inherently think that grinding for pets is like a bad thing. I think it's just that I think players doing the same content for a very, very long time is a big reason why a lot of complaints come out. And it's not that we shouldn't fix those complaints, right? Like if people find issues in our game, we should definitely fix them. But it's hard not to find issues with content when you've done it for 300 hours. Like
Yeah.
there is going to be something that annoys you, right? Like no matter how small it is, there's going to be some small gripe that comes out when you've done something that much in your life. And that's kind of why I'm thinking like I think they could have either been more common to the point where they don't force you to do them so much. They could still be the rarest thing on the drop table, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there's a big gap between Black Tourmaline Core and Grotesque Guardian's Pet, right?
Yep.
Like, there's a big gap there that we could have brought them down significantly. But yeah, they could have still felt rare and like an exciting thing to get randomly.
That
Yeah.
actually is a really interesting take, because, well, and again, like you said, you're probably not on board with it nowadays. We just have a completely different feeling, like culture, I guess, across the game with release of collection log. It feels like people kind of feel entitled to be able to complete certain things, and then when they green log it, they want it to stay green logged. They worked for it, so don't touch it now. But man, if I'm thinking like pre-collection log, if it really had been, 10x or 20x rarer, then getting a pet would be seen as getting third age. And you really are going to value having that pet follow you around. Because it's
You're
like,
gonna feel so cool, right? That's the
oh,
benefits
yeah.
of making things really rare is that it makes them more desirable, right? The benefits of a hardcore Iron Man getting Grandmaster combat achievements, right? Getting the Zook helm, like
Mhm.
that's so much cooler than a regular account because you know what that entails.
Yep.
Like it's so much more prestigious. And that's kind of where I'm like, if you wanted them to be like really prestigious, rare things that early no one had, I think they should have gone a lot rarer. If you wanted them to just be a cool cosmetic that most people can get if you tried hard enough, then I think they could have been more common.
Yeah.
Obviously, everyone's subjectivity about like what's rare and too common and too hard is all up in the air. But that's just my point of view. That I think they're in a weird middle ground right now, especially for some pets, right?
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because I'm definitely a huge proponent of keeping useful drops at a very reasonable drop rate. I think I've just continually, as the years go on, see players just suffering at pieces of content because they feel, and again, like I talked to Husky about this. He agrees, but he also disagrees. He just thinks, when there's some grinds in particular, I'm thinking of CG or I'm thinking of Chambers, people in their minds, especially Iron Man, think that like this is the meta that has been, carved out for me, and I need to go get this Bofa before I can do anything else. And so then they lock
Just too
themselves.
efficient or whatever.
Yeah. But ultimately in my head, I'm thinking, okay, maybe a twisted bow doesn't need to be, like 500, 600 hours for a casual player. Now, of course, it's way more common than that if you have max gear already and you're just grinding chambers out super, super efficiently. But for the average person that's doing 3-man or 4-man chambers and waiting around at the bank and, just kind of going in here and there, not even getting that many points, getting a T-bow is, I feel like it's almost like ignorance really is bliss. You don't want to know how many hours you're going to have to sit here potentially.
Yeah.
So there's places like that. But when it comes to cosmetics, and, I actually kind of agreed with Mod Rock on this, the whole Jar of Darkness thing. Yeah, maybe it shouldn't have been released as a 1 in 2,500 drop on release. But ultimately, it has no use. It's like the equivalent of Third Age. But the collection log community and again, everybody has a different take on this. My take was that this is seen as Third Age at this point. So nobody's going to complete the collection log. I mean, maybe in like 40 years, somebody will. But it's just, that's not something that people should be going for anyway, to complete it. And I thought the Jar of Darkness buff was just seen as, I don't know, catering to the people that just want their clogs, which they're not even useful items. Like I would see it like if the Bofa was to be slightly increased or if a T-bow was to be slightly increased, but a very useless item that's purely flex, I just didn't see a need for that. Same with Stale Baguette. Same with Evil Chicken, just all of a sudden becoming completely devalued. I just feel like these are all flex items that can stay super rare.
Yeah, I think a lot of where the community comes from on this is almost just like a matter of consistency, right? Like Jar of Darkness was the outlier jar, right?
Yeah.
It was so much rarer than every other jar, and that's where I think players like they see the outlier and they kind of want to rein it in. They want to smooth out the edges and bring it all in and make it feel what's right, regardless of the collection log community, even though they have their own motives for it, sure. But I think that's more so what people see is that they kind of want to almost like fix the issues in the game, and that in their eyes looks like an issue.
Hmm.
That's obviously one perspective of seeing those outliers compared to the jars and maybe other similar items. I'm sure, like, if one gilded item was 20 times rarer than the other gilded items, and maybe we'd have the same discussion, right? Like, oh, why is this item just arbitrarily rarer than all the other gilded items? Maybe we should bring that in. Like, even though in reality it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't change anything. They're all just arbitrary drop rates. They're all just almost made up, like, crazy rare cosmetics that don't mean anything. But I think there's almost just this desire to, yeah, fix things in the game, even though it affects virtually nothing. Um, I don't think that's like a bad thing, right? I think people see those things and they think they're trying to help the game, and maybe in some perspectives they are. Just everyone's doing what they think's correct. Again, sometimes they've got their own motives, sometimes they don't. But sometimes things don't need to be consistent, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes there's no benefit to consistency. Like you're doing it for the sake of it. Sometimes there is benefit. Just all case by case. I'm not really sure how I feel about the Jar of Darkness. I don't particularly care. It's just a jar. It's
Yeah.
more rarer, common. Like same logic that you just said that it's useless. Like by the same logic, sure, then it might as well just be more common than
Yeah.
it's just a cosmetic. It's just. I think it would be a shame if the game had nothing that felt ridiculously rare. I think there's just something in me as a gamer where it's like it's cool that some things are just unobtainable and just stupidly rare. Like There's just
Yeah.
something in me that it's just interesting, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't actually matter for the sake of gameplay.
Yeah. No, and I actually agree. I think that's the healthier mindset to see it as let's standardize things. Let's make the game not feel very, very jank on some random item rarities. I think part of the reason I get a little bit upset, it's almost like secondhand upsetness where I know a player, like for example, when Evil Chicken was like incredibly rare, I remember some Reddit posts of like the first Iron Man to get a full Evil Chicken outfit. And it was just seen as wow, like you got so
Yeah.
lucky. And that's it. That's an incredible achievement. Like, well done. And then all of a sudden, Forestry comes out, and now you can grind Evil Chicken in a week if you just sweat it. That was
I
a
do wonder,
yeah.
like, where people sit on that because I just like that. I think I can almost speak for the entire Jagex team in this regard because it's almost like old school's philosophy, right? We want to preserve old grinds. We don't really want to diminish achievements. We don't want people to feel bad that something they've done was almost a waste of time. And that is, to a certain extent, inevitable with a live service game, right? We're going to update things. Some things are going to get easier, but hopefully not by crazy margins, right? We don't really want to make something 10x faster overnight. Some things might progressively get quicker over time. But I think genuinely we don't want to just release an update and just devalue someone's experience entirely.
Hmm.
Um, and like I think if we just said like tomorrow that we're gonna remove 30 of the hardest Grandmaster tasks from Grandmaster combat achievements, like, and it's just gonna be significantly easier, right? I think a lot of people, I'd like to think, that a lot of people would see that as a negative change, right? It's like, oh, now all these people that got grinded for it, um, a lot of their time was wasted. They didn't need to spend hours and hours grinding these miserable tasks like perfect TOB or whatever. Like that's a shame, and we don't really like that. But then yeah, like with things like Evil Chicken, it feels like people just don't really care about that as much. Like they don't really see the prestige in that, and maybe there's validity in that because it's just this like a really weird arbitrary thing as opposed to like a core system of the game like combat achievements.
Hmm.
Maybe that's the reason why people don't care about those things being devalued as much. Maybe people just simply didn't understand like how much it got devalued by. Like unless you're really in the know, maybe you actually just had no idea the magnitude of like, how fast that got. And maybe if we communicated that better, people might push back on it if they could understand that. Maybe it's just a thing that kind of just happened, right? Versus more of a conscious choice.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, but it does seem sometimes a little arbitrary that people are fine with some things getting devalued, but not other things.
Yeah.
Not sure exactly why.
Ultimately, it really is just it's all arbitrary. And there's so much to keep track of too. Like I can't even imagine being a developer coming out with a new update that is slightly game changing. I mean, for example, Dragonstone armor again, just completely useless armor. If that's a flex for Iron Man, it's a collection log for mains that want to spend a bunch of money on the enhanced crystal keys. And if you were to just randomly come out with a new boss that just poops out loops and teeth halves,
Yeah.
you've now completely devalued this fun sort of, on the same level of Evil Chicken grind where Iron Men really see getting full Dragonstone as a huge accomplishment. And a JMod could easily just put into the drop table, oh, we're going to drop like 10 teeth half noted from this boss. There's no problem in that, right? And then all of a sudden there is. And it's the same thing with, you know, even the memes of, Swampletics. If you add an anvil into like Mauritania, you're trolling the place because of one creator. Or like now, if you add, I don't know, there's like a bunch of different examples I could bring up, but it's just funny how like you have to be so careful as a dev to not devalue certain grinds that people find valuable. So I can't even imagine the balancing and the everything that goes along with adding new drop tables and things like that to places. I mean, even the archaeologist on Fossil Island when it dropped a glory, I think like people were so upset by that because you devalued this nostalgic grind that Iron Man have to go, grind 80 Hunter to boost for a glory from a Dragon Imp. So,
Thankfully, we're a live service game, and I'd like to think we're pretty responsive and communicative, right? And we listen to people.
mhm.
So, and when we do make issues like that, we can rectify them. We can fix them.
Yeah.
So we very rarely cause permanent damage with any of these things, you know. So we do make mistakes, 100%. We miss things. We might have forgot that this random arbitrary thing devalued this random arbitrary account. But if we think it's a big enough deal and people are upset with it, then we'll reverse it, you know. And
Yeah.
that's great.
I think it's really cool. It's also, it gives me a little bit of hope as well, seeing how late something can be updated and still be a very good benefit for the game, like the blowpipe getting nerfed years down the line, and that felt like you
Mhm.
cannot do this now. I mean, because we're living in the present, you know, at that point where you don't even see the future of how many dividends this will pay if we just update it now. But now we see it as like a very positive change that the blowpipe got nerfed. Because if it had never got nerfed, if you guys never took that, like, ripped that band-aid off, we'd still be trying to somehow balance Monster's defense to these just uttermost extremes just to make it so the blowpipe isn't just dominant
Yeah.
everywhere.
It gave us so much flexibility, and like I mean, you can see how many different range weapons we've introduced to the game since that
Yep.
wouldn't really have been possible without nerfing that, changing that landscape somewhat.
So there's obviously tons of different branches we can go off right now. I'm obviously just super excited to talk to you because I know you do have, I mean, you have a maxed Iron Man, right? I mean, you said you haven't been playing
Yep.
much recently, but you do have a lot of experience with the game and on the development side. This is kind of a question that has sprung up in previous episodes. Is this kind of idea that the mega rare weapons that have come out, Tebow, Scythe, and Shadow, all are actually the easiest weapons to use because of their slow attack speed. So you're getting the most powerful DPS and the easiest sort of use of it. Like it's easy to not lose ticks with weapons like that. With faster speed weapons, it's easier to lose DPS significantly. So I guess things I've heard is, what if we were to introduce a mega rare weapon that's a very fast attacking weapon? So it is the most powerful in theory, but it's so easy to lose ticks if you're not experienced with the game. So obviously you guys had tried to introduce the Heka of Tumakin, that 2-tick attacking wand, but do you have any feelings on just introducing new mega rares in the future and how you guys are going to go about that?
Um, yeah, I've thought about it a lot. Like, obviously, I'm thinking about the next raid whenever that happens, and it's going to probably want a mega rare. And we've done all the easy ones now, right? We've got a big mage range and a melee weapon. Like, what the hell does a fourth one look like? So I have had thoughts. In terms of like the whole like difficulty component, like fast versus slower attacking, kind of weird, right? Because I'd say a 5-tick weapon is harder to use than a 4-tick weapon because most of our even game cycles there's a lot of content like even game cycles, right? You spend a lot of time with weapons that are even cycles. Then going to an odd cycle can throw you off quite a bit. So there is like a transition period there, learning that. But I don't really have very many 3-tick weapons, so you're really comparing it basically just to blowpipe at that point. So I could see a mega rare weapon being 2-tick. I don't see why not. I think it'd be cool. I think fast weapons are really fun. I think there's a lot of merit there. Yeah, I'm not really sure what else to say on that.
Are you
Yeah.
able to share any of your personal thoughts, or is it just too I don't know, iffy on the, like, should I share how I feel about, because you're probably going to be in direct development with raids 4. Are you able to share anything that you like are excited for coming from the raid and the rewards in general, or would you rather keep it a secret?
Um, I can say that I think I've recently, not recently discovered, but more so figured out that a lot of our core limitations are almost purely caused by engine. So if we want to do something like truly innovative and truly interesting, engine kind of needs to drive that and gives us the tools to enable that. I've been somewhat proactive on asking for a lot of fancy engine commands that should make the eventual raids 4 very interesting.
Okay, so I'm excited about that. Excited to hear that.
We'll see
Uh,
how it works.
yeah,
Still a while off.
interesting. Let's talk as well about modifiers and invocations. That I think there was even a topic on that. Just I mean, somebody had brought up the idea of, why didn't Colosseum have modifiers that buffed you as the monsters get more and more challenging? Obviously, that's very hard to balance. And I think in theory, if you just think about it lightly, it's like, oh yeah, why didn't they go down that route? But then it's really hard to know what buffs you give that's going to still make the fight challenging. What are your thoughts on invocations at this point with TOA having them and the modifiers at the Colosseum?
For invocations at TOA, I love them. I think they're interesting. I think they're a cool system. Obviously, could have done a better job. Could have had more interesting ones. Could have had a lot more variety, etc., etc. Absolute nightmare to balance. Holy shit! So much work just to actually make that system somewhat possible. So I'm not sure if we're doing them anytime soon. We might try a different approach. Like we can still have customization with difficulty, right? And even Araxxor has technically got customizable difficulty on a very soft scale, and it's a bit more gameplay focused rather than interface focused. But yeah, I think they're a cool system. I think customizable difficulty and rewards, etc., are just a really interesting space for us to mess with. Or the primary point around the Colosseum. So, for context, the Colosseum was based off of Tazakal Trials, which is me and a couple of other devs did in a game jam in like 2021 or something. So I was like I was there very early on, and it was based on Path of Exile's league called Ultimatum, which has a very similar system where you do round based waves, get a modifier every round, makes it more difficult. You see your loot, risk reward, etc., which Coliseum still kind of holds true to some point. Um, obviously the inspiration, and that didn't have any buffs or anything. I'm not saying like, oh, it didn't have any buffs, so we couldn't have had any buffs. But the main reason why it didn't have buffs is that for it to have buffs, I think they would have had to be like buffs with downsides. I don't think you could just give straight buffs. Content should get harder the deeper you get into it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it shouldn't get easier. So if you're providing buffs, and if I said, oh, I give you 100% more damage with one of these buffs, right? It shouldn't make the next wave 100% easier. Next wave should still be more difficult. Like, what am I doing then? Am I giving stuff 110% hit points? But then they're effectively 10% slower to kill because you got 100% buff. So, what's the point in the buff then if I'm just having to compensate with it constantly? It just makes it weirdly inconsistent. So, I think the buffs would have only really worked if it was like, yeah, you gain some damage, but you have this downside, and the debuffs and the buffs are attached to each other. And I think there's merit in that, and we could have done something like that. We kind of just didn't. It is a little bit more complicated. It's harder to really understand. It's hard to understand the value. In general, I would love to do like a proper roguelike RuneScape, where it does have like more nuanced buff systems and debuff systems and a weirder difficulty curve. I think it would work really well, to be honest. But it's definitely a project, not really game jam worthy. Much bigger than that. But I would love to work on something like that. I think it'd be very cool. But yeah, in general, I guess the answer is waves should get more difficult. Buffs would have to still take that into account. You don't want the player to just get stronger and stronger and stronger. It kind of defeats the point of games almost. They're supposed to have like a difficulty curve, and that curve is supposed to increase.
Yeah. I on the topic of the Colosseum, I'm a huge fan of just the whole quickness of it, and like it's just such a fast challenge, like the just 12 waves. I was very surprised week one just how quick it seemed to get to wave 10. You're like, oh my god, like I'm almost done. And I think you guys also just perfectly executed the soul fight. It's just such a pleasure to fight it. It's so much fun, and it's not overly difficult. It's like,
yeah, I think it's a cool fight. I wasn't too involved at that point. Most of the credit should go to ModMac. He's definitely leading that project. I definitely helped out with like some balancing and just play test a lot, get feedback, etc. But yeah, the Soul went through quite a bit of iteration, but Mac definitely had a vision for it, and I think it was executed fairly well.
yeah,
I'm glad people like it.
it's fun. It's a treat. It's like it's probably, I mean, it's more fun than Zuck. I think part of the reason it's so much fun is because you can't just repeatedly grind just that fight. So it's just like it's like a cherry on top, you know. You just get this little moment of having this fun fight that you got to work for. But
It is a really big benefit because we do have that issue quite often with RuneScape bosses where it's just really hard to make boss that you're going to grind for like 500 to 2,000 times back to back to back to back to back actually fun. Like
Yeah.
it's so hard to actually make that interesting and engaging, and then also make it so it's like a challenge initially, but then it also tapers off, and you can kind of brain dead it eventually because that's what everyone wants, right? You
Hmm.
want it to be an interesting challenge you got to solve, and then you eventually want it to just become completely brain dead, and you can just turn your brain off and mindlessly grind it. No one actually wants to be putting conscious effort every minute for 5,000 kills. Like no one actually wants that.
I know.
Um, Creating that is really difficult. So then when you do have things like Sol or quest bosses or a raid boss, like you get a lot more flexibility there because you're like, oh, well, they're not actually grinding this back to back to back to back. I could probably put a couple of mechanics in there that maybe wouldn't be the most fun or interesting thing to do repeatedly, but because it's just 2 minutes every hour or 2 hours or even once ever, then you can kind of get away with it, right?
Yeah, that's so true. It's funny because a lot of the average player, including myself, would not know that. It's just like, why are some things more enjoyable than others? And it's so much of it probably is just to do with not grinding it for 300 plus hours. It's just
Yeah.
get a one
It kind of
time
goes
feel
back
for
to
it.
what I was saying before, right? If you do something 300 times in a row for like a day, you're gonna find issues. You're gonna find
Yeah.
that walking path from the bank to the boss. There's like 3 tiles on there that is slightly suboptimal. That tree's just in the way. It annoys me so much, man. Like they really nitpicky stuff. And yeah, well, sure, we'll go fix it. Whatever. There's no harm for us to do that. But it's just like when you're at that level, like your boss has to be almost airtight because they will find problems with it.
Yeah, yeah, seriously. Uh, yeah, one of the cool things, and I think you guys have kind of mastered it in a way, is just adding a lot of consistency. Because, like what you say, grinding a boss 5,000 times, you want it to become brain dead at some point. You don't want to keep having your brain actively engaged and critically thinking the whole time. It's going to be such a exhausting thing to do. Um, I think the DT2 fights are insanely enjoyable. Even Duke has grown on me. Now I'm over 3x the rate for the pet, but still, I have gripes with it, but ultimately I love how consistent it is. It has the same pattern every time, which
Mm.
is so good to do. Like I sometimes I worry about a new fight coming out that you guys develop that isn't going to have that. That really is just you have to be actively engaged with how it's going to stomp every single kill. Like that would be
Yeah.
such a mess to
I
deal
mean, it's
with.
kind of nightmare, right? And whilst it's nice to have some bosses that deviate from it, like doing Nightmare is still quite exhausting. Like that, you're just waiting for that melee screech, like every
Yeah.
single time. You're
Yeah.
waiting for it. You can't turn your brain off.
Yeah, that's a good point. There are some places, but I think for the most part, you guys really nail it. And there's always the little nitpicks. I think the biggest nitpicks that I generally have are things that feel sluggish. Just little elements where there's like a tick delay, where something you
Yeah,
can't move for a
it
tick or
breaks the
something.
flow, right? The
Yep.
momentum.
Yep. Um, I,
I get
I
that.
I was even thinking, just on the topic of Duke. Now that I'm talking about it, one of the coolest parts, if you guys could do this, is just making it so those vats are like one tick faster. So as you're approaching them, that's when you actually deposit it. So it's not like you actually have to be there for a tick, then you dump in the
Mm.
stuff. Something like that would
I
make
find
it.
that matters a lot, right?
Yeah, yeah, and it's just more free flowing. And then on top of that, I even brought this up. Imagine you could just left click Duke, and that instant chucks the two potions. If you make the two potions instead of having to use the potions directly on it, you just click the boss and it chucks them. So just little things like that. And again, doing this for 300 hours at this point, I have a bunch of
Yeah.
different random gripes, but ultimately, it's a pretty enjoyable fight.
That's the hard part for us to figure out during development, right? Because during development, we're not killing the boss for 3,000
Yeah,
kills, like back to back to back. Like,
yeah, so
hard to
true.
find those things.
Yeah. What is your favorite of the DT2 bosses?
Very, very biased, but ooh, I, I really want to say Vardorvis because I just like he was my boss. Like that, I like as much as I worked on all of them,
Hmm.
like he was like my baby. Like I definitely worked on him a lot by myself. But I really liked Leviathan just from like the flow of the fight and the aesthetic of it all and like the circular arena and stuff. I don't know. There's something about that fight I think is really cool. But I think just from how it actually plays and the momentum of it and like the soundtrack and everything, I think Vardarvas just feels like such a tight experience. Really. about.
Yeah, no, I think I'd agree with that. I think most people actually probably agree. It's so quick. It's just there's no real weapon switching, no gear switching. You're just there in your melee gear. Let's just
Right?
mess up
Yeah.
this guy. That's cool. Yeah, and it's fast paced. The whole thing is just like from the get go, axes swinging, dodging stuff. It's great. Let's talk about Araxxor, which is coming out in 2 days from this recording. Um, yeah. So how much did you work on that? Was that like a main project you've been working on?
Yeah, that was primarily mine. I was supposed to be working on Halo, but I had to move around. Majority just me. So if it's
Okay.
awful, then it's purely on my head.
Okay. Well, now you got all the pressure of the community.
Yep.
How is that pressure before we talk about Araxxor? Like when you've developed something and you know it's about to drop to hundreds of thousands of players, what are the feelings going through your head? Like, are you nervous or are you mostly excited?
Yeah, I mean everything, right? I thought it'd get easier after a couple of years, but no, it's literally the same feelings every time. It's like dread from like any bugs or like will they even like it? Will it be fun? Does the drop table work? Like every generic fear I think J-Mod suffered with from experience here, but obviously excitement as well because you put a lot of hours and time into something and you're like, please, I hope they like it.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, mixture of everything.
What are your thoughts on the new amulet of Rancor, which is obviously going to be the new best in slot melee amulet, and it's going to slightly put a little bit more of a gap in between the Blood Fury, which is a
Mhm.
go-to for so many pieces of content at this point. I personally think it's a great thing to have a new melee amulet in particular than the other three styles of like the Zenite jewelry. So I'm excited for it, and I also think it'll, like I just said, give a little bit less incentive to use a Blood Fury. And I'm biased because I've always played Iron Man, and grinding blood shards is just horrendous.
Yeah, I think on the actual Amulet Rancor, yeah, seems fine. It seems cool. In terms of like actual reward design, the easiest thing we have to do when it comes to rewards is obviously look through all the current rewards and go, okay, what is the best in slot reward that's given from content that's probably not like deserving of it? And Tormented Demons are the big outlier. Where they're not in-game content by any metric at all, so it's probably enough room there to add something on top. We're kind of running out of those in reality. Like if you want to do another mage gear set, kind of hard to usurp a raid. So as soon as something's released from a raid, kind of got our hands tied a little bit until we start going attachment scape and everything.
Yeah.
So we are running out of those easy spots. Obviously, occult probably has some space now, especially because we lowered it with the um, project rebounds. So maybe that's got some room. Tormented bracelet, still got those. I think maybe the boots is the spot we can look at soon as well, since as much as it comes from a level 91 boss, I feel like there's enough room above that for like harder, more deserving pieces of content like raids or bigger group bosses, etc.
Yeah. It's tough though because, on top of just these like arbitrary requirements, like if you want to get the best in slot mage boots, you have to get 91 slayer, but then you're like, okay, let's add some new ones that doesn't have a slayer requirement, but you almost have to balance it like, okay, we in terms of game progression, we need to make it so it's more difficult than getting to 91 slayer, because you don't want that to feel like a pointless grind at some point. So that in my head feels like the reason why drop rates get so extreme sometimes, is because it's like you kind of need to balance it so you're not getting these better boots, that come in the future over Eternals. You don't want to get that first. And then I don't know what your thoughts are
Kind of,
on
yeah.
attachment scape. I mean, we're basically there where everything has to be an attachment, because you don't want to devalue these nostalgic grinds that we've all come to know and love.
Yeah, on the actual like drop rates, it's like yes and no. Like sometimes you feel like you can balance drop rates according to like the power of the item. So if we were going to release something better than a T-bow, then should it now be 700 hours on rate to get it? Like from one point of view, yes, but we know how miserable that would be. So from another point of view, obviously not.
Yeah.
So like drop rates can come into it, but I think it's mostly like requirements, which determines like accessibility as well as like maybe how attentive the content is. Obviously, doing a raid versus doing a tormented demon or a demonic girl or whatever, vastly different, right? More gear requirements as well. You're probably expected to bring a bit better gear to something like TOB than just a Slayer creature. So there's a lot that goes into determining all of these things. But yeah, in terms of the attachment scape, uh, I don't. I dislike it from like a thematic slash game feel point of view. Like I don't really know how to word it. Like I dislike the potential future that everything requires something else, and we're gonna end up in a world where you've got like best in slot melee gear that requires another best in slot melee gear that requires Torva, which requires Bandos. Like you end up with this massive chain. Like it feels kind of ugly and like unelegant, but from both a player progression point of view as well as an economy point of view, it kind of just works. Like it kind of is just a good solution. It kind of just works, but it does just feel kind of wrong. I'm not really sure like what other options we have. I've thought about it quite a lot. I've obviously been involved in quite a lot of the reward design since like TOA next onwards, etc. So there has been quite a lot of rewards where it's kind of like, oh, we want to fill the slot. We don't really want to devalue the old content. What are our good options? And then attachmentscape almost always wins out as the best option, like,
Yep.
without hurting other pieces of content. Like in one world, Torva could have not been attached to Bandos, and we might have had a economy of Bandos is just the cheaper melee gear that you just use at a certain point of the game, and then you get to a certain point, you sell your Bandos, you buy your Torva, and there's demand for both of them because not everyone can buy Torva. Fantastic, but there is also the theoretical world that okay, now Bandos is worth 1 mil because everyone buys Torva. There isn't that much demand for Bandos anymore. Everyone just sells it immediately. Bandos is worthless. General Gardor is now dead content because all of its drops are worthless.
Yep.
And that's something that everyone's obviously terrified of. Like, no one really wants that. So I think that's a big reason why we gravitate towards attachments because it's so safe. It's really hard to verbalize, like, the weirdness of it, right? Like, the whole, like, thematic, like, everything attaching to something else. I know there's some people who love the idea of everything attaching to something else. And in 10 years, you end up with, like, I don't know if you played Terraria at all.
No.
But they have a progression tree where like the end game weapon for the entire game probably requires something like 60 or 70 different weapons all combined into one to make the ultimate end game weapon. And they love it, right? The games love it, and it makes everything relevant. It makes all these resources relevant. You need everything, and it means every single time you grind for one of those weapons, because you're going to use them all at different points of your account, it has purpose, and it's going to go somewhere eventually. It's going to eventually go into that mega rank game weapon. So from a player progression point of view, it works really well, and it makes everything feel a lot more satisfying. Equally, it means you're not going to have that boss that just drops the end game weapon. That can't exist, right?
Yep.
Because it requires all these other components, and that kind of feels kind of lame as well. Like imagine, like is Raids 4 not going to drop a Mega Rare? Is it going to require a Mega Rare that requires T-Bow and Scythe and Shadow, and you combine them all together? Like it doesn't drop one. That feels kind of wrong. But are we going to end up in a world like that? I don't know. Maybe.
It's so tough. Yeah, no, that's so funny because you're saying at the drawing board when you guys are discussing it, it always feels like the best option is the attachment scape. And I'm totally on board with like attachment scape. And I do agree with your sentiment on it not feeling good. I mean, Desert Treasure 2 has one of the worst feelings when you get the drop because it's untradeable. You don't get the beam. You don't get the pink beam that shows that it's super high GE value. You got to attach it to a separate ring. You got to break it down. You got to do all this stuff. And it's not just like, boom, there's the Ultor ring sitting there. Equip it right now. It just feels like a big process, especially as an Iron Man when, you get duplicate. I mean, I've had like, I don't even know how many at this point, like 12 Magus vestiges, and all of them require a Sears ring for my iron just to drop over if I want to, drop it over to another account. It's just a lot of,
That's actually a separate discussion because that's coming from a point of view of wanting to make sure the quest has like an impact, right? So people don't just log in, they create a level 3 account and they just equip their Ultar ring, right? So we want to kind of have a requirement
Yeah.
there, and that's why you need the quest to equip the ring. So that's like one point of view of like having those requirements for that stuff. But then there's also the perspective of, and this is what majority is the case, what led to the vestiges having this like uh, step-by-step process, and actually is kind of what is the same with the Araxxor as well. So unfortunately, you're giving that feedback since Araxxor's got a similar thing, right?
Yeah, I mean,
But
I accept it at this point. It's little gripes like that, but yeah, go
no,
ahead.
I completely agree. It definitely is a negative, right, towards the entire experience. But the main reason for that is to kind of give skilling more of a purpose, because it's quite a unanimous opinion, right, in the community about how people want skilling to be profitable, but we can't just make fishing a shark and cutting magic logs profitable, right? If they're profitable, then bots will abuse it. They're no longer profitable. So things that require more effort and more requirements are always going to be more profitable than the opposite. That is the case. So how do we make skilling like feel worthwhile leveling up? One thing is like achievement diaries, quest requirements, introducing new mini games that might require you to have a certain level to do a certain part of the mini game. Obviously, like Farming Guild has the third section that requires 85 farming. They're all kind of things, requirements. That's one big way of making skills feel valuable. Obviously, items fall under that. So by making the vestiges require a crafting or a smithing level or whatever to make, it makes investing in those skills feel a little bit more worthwhile and makes them feel like they don't just have like zero purpose. Because we do have a lot of main accounts, but they'll get the quest requirements, like 72 smithing or whatever it is, 72 mining, etc. And then they have literally no reason to get higher than that, apart from to max the skill, which the vast majority of players obviously don't want to do. Maybe they'll try and get some achievement diaries, but it's kind of just to promote the landscape a bit more. And when you do stuff like that, especially on bosses, it actually almost makes the skill have profit associated with it. Because if you try to do the DT2 bosses and you only have like 50 crafting and smithing or whatever, you almost can't cash in on that money unless you've trained your skill. So you're
True.
almost making more money because you've leveled up your skill. And I think on paper that sounds really good. And I'd like to think a lot of players are like, yeah, that makes sense. That's good. I'm rewarded for leveling up my skill. Compare that to stuff like World of Warcraft. Like there's a really big incentive to level up your skills so people can use your cooldowns to provide them resources and stuff. And I think people generally like that idea, generally, that having a higher skill means you're better at something and can make more money from it. But then when it comes down to the actual gameplay of it, where like you said, I don't get the loot beam, I can't sell the item immediately. I've got to then go buy this other item or go farm this other item. Then I got to go combine it, which might require me to go to some arbitrary place to actually make it for some bullshit thematic reason. And then I get the item, and now I can go sell it or whatever. It just ends up feeling tedious.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a hard thing to get, and we don't even have anything. No, I haven't played RS3. We don't even have anything like is it invention that you're dismantling things and being able to I feel like almost that would almost make things even more convoluted and complicated, and but in a way you could actually kind of have some sort of system where not everything needs to be attachments, because you actually do just break things down, so everything's always going to have a value. Like bringing it back to Bandos, just the fact that you would break that down for components and something. Again, I don't know much about invention at all, just things I've heard. But
it gives items another purpose, another value. So it's like we could theoretically live in a world where we completely power creep, say, Inquisitor's armor, but if we just made it dismantle with invention into a load of resources that are really desirable for the skill or whatever, then we could just accept that and move on, right? Go, okay, Inquisitors, you're probably never going to equip it anymore, but it still has a purpose in the game. It's really good for invention. It's going to be the best thing to dismantle for this resource. So then Nightmare as a piece of content still has value. Those items are still going to be valuable. People are going to want to do it for the GP per hour for those items. It doesn't just turn into a dead item. So having systems in the game that provide ulterior purposes for items is really desirable from like an economic standpoint. The only thing we really have for that is things like clues. Like clues are really weird, right? Because like some player might genuinely want a second dragon pickaxe so they can store it in their stash unit, and that actually massively increases the demand for some items. Because that's just going to sit in there. It's almost like an item sink in itself, right? People buy that, put it in there. It's purely for their clues. They've increased the demand for it. We can now power creep the dragon pickaxe, make it completely useless, but it still has a purpose for that clue. Obviously, not a huge demand because it's still just clues, and I don't know how many people do clues and have bought a dragon pickaxe or a stash unit, but it does add that extra demand. But we don't really have many of those. If an item isn't good in PVM, then it's probably not got a high value.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, no, you're actually, you bring up clue scrolls. What are your thoughts on clue scrolls at this point? It feels like we're kind of gate kept from ever adding new cosmetics. I feel like we were, as the team and the community, we were very free to just add a bunch of random cosmetics every few years and add new steps. And I mean, I guess you guys still add steps, which is cool for like new content like Varlamore and stuff, but do you think we're ever gonna like? What is the game plan now for clue scrolls? Is it just don't touch them for the next 5-10 years because people are now obsessed with their green collection logs that they've completed, so we can't add any more cosmetics? And I don't know if you guys are even planning on Grandmaster clues at some point, whatever the hell those are gonna be. Do you have any thoughts?
I have been part of a lot of like new discussions. I know Mod Kieran in particular is very much wondering like what the end game looks like, and he is thinking about bigger picture. We have talked about how adding cosmetics, like people are generally happy for us to add cosmetics, and it can just be a free sentiment win, but they don't really hold any value, right? Like 99% of those cosmetics are going to be worth absolutely nothing within a week of release.
Mm-hmm.
It's like they don't really change the landscape for clues. So are we just adding, like you say, a bunch of extra log slots that might equally annoy, equally excite some players for the sake of it? Maybe. Grandmaster clues, really cool idea and concept, but I'm not sure if we have enough requirements that are high enough to justify it, because Master Clues already have really high requirements, right?
Mm-hmm.
So hard to know what they'd really involve unless they're like really PVM heavy, or they require you to do an entire skilling minigame or something. I don't know. And they could be mega involved, but do people even want that? I think people generally want to just kind of brain dead, go through clues. Clue helper just tells them where to go.
Yep.
So doing entire minigames probably wouldn't be the shout. So I don't know. I think the easy answer is just like a few good cosmetics. Like imagine if we added dyes from like RS3, where it's like, yeah, you can now dye your Scythe of Aether, and like it can look completely different. Like, is that a cool landscape? Maybe. Do we keep high-end cosmetics for items like that purely from PVM, like we've done, right? Scythe ornament kit and stuff. I know there's a lot of negativity about the DMM offering ornament kits for the mega rares, so maybe clues aren't appropriate for that. But I think there's probably room somewhere for some cool new like best in slot ornament kits for some things at least. On clues that probably have some demand and make clues a bit more profitable in some sense. No, I don't really know what the end game is. There is a desire to do something. We're still investigating it, really. I don't think we're particularly holding ourselves back because of action loggers.
Yeah, it is tough though, because you don't want to just piss off a big chunk of the community that does care about
Not
it.
necessarily, no.
One of the things I talked about with I'm a Drum, he's a big clue scroll fanatic. I had him on the cast last time, and we were kind of discussing clues, stackable clues and stuff, but one of the things, if you did want to go down a safer route with adding new uniques to the other tiers, easy, medium, hard, and elite, is to do something fun, like maybe just add a couple on each where they actually are useful. Like for example, spiked manacles, like they genuinely have a use. They're a new like pure item that has a +4 strength, really good for early Iron Man if you pull those. Something that feels good. It's not game breaking at all, but it's one of those valuable uniques that can be added. Instead of adding, 8 more boaters to the medium table, just add something fun that's useful, that has an actual use, not just purely cosmetic. And then you could do that for all of them. You could add just a couple for hards, maybe some new, I don't know, maybe even just a different form of cosmetic of Robin Hood hat, like a Robin Hood hat that's like the same stats but a different look, like a black Robin Hood, or just something fun, so that the cloggers feel like they're not just grinding 8 more boaters or 8 more elegant pieces, but okay, we're hunting this one item. This is gonna be fun. Everyone's jumping back on mediums for the next month because this update just dropped. Everyone has lost their green log mediums that have done it, but we're going to go send them now. And the same thing with elites. And I even think elites could have the biggest, item updates just to make elites a little bit more profitable. Add like a couple very significant items that feel good to grind out that, I don't know, would be cool. Because I feel like right now elites only have like the Fremenic kilt and the Ranger tunic and the Ranger gloves, which are all pretty useless. But yeah, just something,
Those
it's
are bad
just
ideas.
thoughts that we were thinking of, and I think that would probably be like a good way to go about it if you guys ever did introduce new stuff.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on stackable clues? We're living in this weird middle ground era that I considered a middle ground, where you just juggle everything and you just have like 20 clues stacked in the crafting guild and you just keep rejuggling them. And it's almost like stackable, but just kind of with added annoyances. What are your thoughts?
Isn't it isn't it crazy how one minor quality of life feature that was supposed to just be like, oh yeah, this just like fixes a small issue with some limited accounts is effectively just added stackable clues into the entire game.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
Pretty wild.
It's totally true, though.
There's one part of me that is like clues should be a D&D. It
Hmm.
shouldn't be like a really active part of the game that people are like constantly grinding. They should just be like that random thing you get every now and again, just breaks up content. Because I think the game does benefit a lot from that. It's kind of like what I was saying before. I think players benefit from a variety, and just spending 2,000 hours killing the same boss isn't good for variety and can generally just make you enjoy the game less. But then equally, I know that our players love to target one singular thing and then grind the hell out of the game until they have accomplished that before moving on. That's how everyone plays our game. No one legitimately just goes like, yeah, I'll kill this boss like 3 times, and I'll go over here and kill this boss like 12 times. Yeah, I'll do a clue. Then I'll do a farm run. Screw it. Like, not many people like genuinely play like that. They do like obviously farm runs are kind of forced, but
Yeah.
not many people actually are like mega variety gamers within the game. Maybe on a day by day basis, but very rarely by a minute basis, right? So from that point of view, like maybe there is like a world where we do kind of promote the abilities to just grind out shit ton of clues and then burn through them all. I do think there's a if we were gonna go down that way, I'd rather it be gamified a lot more. Like imagine you have like your own Slayer store where you can block certain clue steps, you can make certain clue steps highly weighted, you can unlock like a bunch of slots, there's a bunch of cosmetics you can buy in the store, quality of life teleports. You unlock the ability to stack like 5, 10, 15, 25 of like different clue tiers. Like you could gamify it so much where it's an entirely engaging reward loop that people can actually engage with without just going like bam, stackable clues, everyone go wild. Um, I think that would be more interesting and more rewarding for players than just doing that. But yeah, I don't know what we're gonna do. I don't know who's gonna do that. I'm not working on that, so
Yeah. Yeah. No, there's a billion ideas to, I mean, just with you talking about just, added like 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 stackable clues. I was even just thinking when you said that, adding it as a like a crafting requirement. Like you have to actually craft the clue box to hold
I
more.
am.
So
Yeah,
some of
so
them
that'd
like,
be really cool.
yep. Yeah, there's so many options. I feel like, well, at least I just hope that soon we'll come to some sort of consensus in the community of what we want, because there is still a divide between the player base of we don't want any form of stackable. The juggling tech is fine for now. In my opinion, I think the juggle tech feels, it's such a stupid term to say, but private servery. I was actually laughing at that the other day. Just the private server. You just say private server for anything that just like you don't like, pretty much. But it does feel a little private servery to be juggling clues. Now, I actually was doing the Varlamore thieving last night on stream, and just dropping easies by the bazaar and whatever it is, Varlamore, just that city center, dropping a bunch of easies, then going to do them, and it feels like stackable clues already, but just with a little bit of inconvenience that feels weird. And I'm at the point, I've always been against stackable clues for years, but now that we're at this middle ground that's probably never going to get reverted, I'm just like, just send it. Like, just, it could be limited. It's totally fine. And, and there was even a sentiment from some players like, okay, what about limited builds? If you add stackable clues, then, people aren't going to be able to do the juggle tech, which, benefits a lot of Snowflake accounts in order to do clues. But there actually is a way around that, which is just the League's version where, you just have the actual scroll boxes. You can open up clues and
Yeah.
you could still juggle them, but you have the scroll boxes that you open once you're done.
It's almost like an additional thing rather than a replacement.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, I guess we'll see. You said yeah, you're not really that's not in your that's not your main thing that you're doing on the team. So we'll see. But yeah, I am looking forward to something like that. Um, okay, there was another question talking about the difficulty of CAs, and as the game progresses, what are your guys' thoughts on, for example, the Grandmaster time for the Inferno? Do you think that's ever going to get changed? Are you guys very happy with just keeping all the challenges the same and just the fact that there's so many coming out? Like, it's not, we don't just have 400 tasks now, we got 555, and those are just endlessly going to increase. So instead of going back to the drawing board and just revamping all the tasks continuously to make them more and more and more challenging, I feel like the challenge really is you just have so many more tasks to do. But what are your thoughts on going back and changing certain task times and stuff?
What's your point of view on this? I've not really heard much about this in the community.
Honestly, I like first of all, I don't ever think, and I think you guys agree with this, the team kind of as a whole. I don't know, maybe you guys have differing opinions, but I honestly don't think Grandmaster needs to be the Oblivion Diary difficulty where it's just stupidly hard and you have to have so much coordination. I really think it is just make something that's pretty hard, and you're going to have to get a bunch of end game items for it. You're going to have max stats, preferably for the Zuck helmet, but nothing is too derangingly difficult where you just have to be a giga sweat to complete it. And I think, in my opinion, don't go back and change times. Don't go back and change things. Just keep it as is, and because things get easier over time. It's the same thing with the Infernal Cape. I mean, the Infernal Cape was way more difficult to obtain back in the day, and nowadays we have so much better gear. We have just a bunch of stuff that makes it easier. So technically, yes, the Infernal Cape has been devalued, like the Inferno in general, just because of new stuff that's come out. But I don't think you need to buff Inferno right now just to keep the Infernal Cape at a more of a prestigious level continuously. I just think just keep it.
Yeah, it kind of marries up with what I'm thinking. I It gets easier over time, like you say, with all these new items coming in. It gets harder at some points, right? When we add new tasks, like when we added the Awakened DT2 bosses as
Hmm.
tasks, like that's technically a difficulty spike on it. But Grandmaster's only ever going to be as hard as its hardest task, and I'm not sure what the community's reception is these days, but at least back then it was still like perfect Hob. It was like one of the hardest tasks. Um, and that's debatably getting easier with gear, but equally it's not really about the gear, it's just about playing well.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really change in that regard. In terms of the quantity of tasks, I don't really see a way around that. We try and release an appropriate amount with each piece of content. We don't really add new tasks to older content. It would be weird if new content just didn't have any tasks. So, and it just seems like just going to grow. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I do think we hit certain breakpoints where you probably need to up the rewards a bit because obviously the ratio of how much effort you got to put in for the rewards technically gets skewed more and more over time, right? And we've done that a couple of times. We've buffed the rewards after a period of time.
Yeah.
So maybe in another year or two, we go through the rewards again, give you some more interesting stuff for each tier because of how much more work it is. I think that's generally fine. I'm curious what other people think, if this is a growing sentiment around the community, any discontent anywhere.
Yeah, I think most people would probably agree with that. The rewards over time, every couple of years, just adding some more rewards feels good. And I feel like most players agree with this. If you have a Zuck helmet, what we really want is the Gommel's Hill to not teleport you into that little teeny area behind the rock of the Tazar place. Can we just like teleport to the bank itself already? I think most people are kind of annoyed of walking behind that rock in that little enclave little thing and just running to the bank from there. I think if Gommel's Hill were to simply teleport you into that bank vicinity, that would just be a huge quality of life change. It would be
That
the
doesn't sound
yeah, it would because the crafting guild is the max bank, and this would be the grandmaster bank. The Tazar place. So I think that'd be cool. And you know what? I was always kind of I was yelling on some rambles, giving us DKs teleport. Give us a Gommel's Hilt, that teleports us to the DKs ladder. But now we have two very nice shortcuts, which I'm so happy about. Like those are so good.
I think the shortcuts are great, and I would love to do more of them. I think there's so much potential for just like good shortcuts, and honestly, they're just not really that much work for a dev to implement. Like
Hmm.
I implemented almost all of those shortcuts in a couple of days, um, and they don't require like really any R assets or anything. Some of them are very awkward. I don't know if you saw my post on Reddit, but they were talking about the Fossil Island one. They have like some really weird engine limitations. It makes some shortcuts very painful to implement.
Yeah,
I didn't end up doing that one, but most of the time, quite easy to just go and implement a shortcut, and they have massive benefits, right, to
they
the players. Like
do.
those DK ones are going to be huge. The VLD caves ones as well. Like I just save so much time.
Yep.
And it does genuinely make agility feel like it's worth leveling up, and we can do hundreds of those. And maybe that's just how we make agility worthwhile, which is hundreds and hundreds of shortcuts, just making so many journeys so much nicer.
Yeah, no, that really is, and make them snappy. That was one of my complaints
Yeah.
with all the added shortcuts was just the random delays at the end, like, oh, let me move.
Yeah.
But you're totally right. I mean, and I think you guys nailed it as well with the blog post talking about like removing diary requirements from these agility shortcuts. Like why do you have to have both? So that was smart as well, in my opinion. Yeah, we'll see. Do you have anything to? Oh, this is actually one of the questions about Araxxor, the new kind of like two tile melee weapon. I want to ask because obviously I already have a few places in mind where that weapon's just gonna shine. It's just gonna be so cool. There's a little niche uses as well. If you need to like get an extra tick in, you can just attack things, one tick earlier potentially on odd tile. If you're running up to an
Mhm.
encounter like Maiden, for example, obviously people are shooting a T-bow generally, but there's just little situations where that weapon's actually going to come in clutch.
Yep.
But do you have anything in mind that you would want to share that you think players might be forgetting how powerful this weapon could be at some situations?
Probably not. Players probably have a better idea than I am. But
Okay.
yeah, I do think there's going to be a lot of random situations that we wouldn't have brought a Crystal Halberd to because of whatever reasons. But this is actually a suitable thing to bring, and it's going to end up feeling really nice.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. Uh, And then you were saying, Araxxor is not going to have modifiers per se, but there's going to be ways to intuitively kind of scale up or scale down the difficulty. Do you have anything to say about that? I know it's dropping in a couple days, so maybe you don't want to share, but anything?
Yeah, I think the blog that's going out is fairly explicit with what's going on because it's not supposed to be like this new really hard encounter, so we're not trying to like hide things away. See, people are still gonna find stuff out and experiment and discover exactly how the mechanics work. But how that like what I mean by that is that like Araxxor spawns in the middle of the room, and the room's got like nine, six eggs surrounding it, and each egg is color coded with a different type of or not Nalicus, it's a different type of Araxite, and each Araxite does something different. And basically, you can just kill the egg. You can just walk up to the egg and kill it. Obviously, the egg doesn't fire back, and now that Nalicus won't spawn, or that Araxite won't spawn anymore. Um, and that gives you a bit of flexibility where it's like, I don't like dealing with that spider, or when that spider spawns, X happens, which is frustrating or awkward for me to deal with, or if I kill this one as an egg, that means I don't need to bring the switch. Like, I'm hoping there's quite a bit of optimization there, and it should be kind of up to the individual player and like what setups they can bring, where that'll determine if they do actually engage in that at all. I think on the very top end, if you have like whatever switches you care about or whatever you can get, and you're fairly competent at PVM, you're probably not going to kill any of the eggs, and you're going to deal with all of the spiders that come out, and they're going to be dealt with in different ways, which I've implemented quite a lot of different ways of you dealing with them. So there should be quite a bit of creativity and freedom there. But for those players that do just genuinely go like, yeah, I don't have this type of weapon switch, I'm just going to kill the egg. They can just do that. Um, so that's kind of what I mean by it's a kind of a flexible difficulty system where you're going to get less kills per hours, but you might take a lot less damage if you kill these eggs, or you might be able to bring 4 or 5 less switches if you kill these eggs, so then you can just stay there for longer, etc. So
That is cool. And it's not a menu that you need to open. It's just directly
no,
interacting with the content, which is so cool.
exactly. Yeah.
Cool. I'm excited. I won't be actually grinding it on Wednesday. I'll be focused on the hardcore group, but I'm definitely going
Yeah.
to be watching a lot of Araxxor streams. I know so many people are so hyped for it. So, do
Get your Slayer level up ASAP.
yeah. A lot of people have been stacking points up too. Um, do you, you know what? This is kind of a weird thing to bring up, but like, what are your thoughts on Turiel Slayer and just Slayer in general? I don't have much to say on this. I don't really know if you have any thoughts on how Slayer works currently. I mean, Turiel has just always been the move for so many things, point boosting and getting Inferno tasks and things. Do you guys have any thoughts on revamping Slayer in some ways? Do you guys discuss it as a team?
Mm. I don't think we've really sat down and gone like we just like how Slayer works right now. Let's try and revamp it. But there's always ways to improve everything. Just even looking as far back as that Boss Slayer Master project that I proposed on like my first couple of months that went down like a ton of bricks. And that was obviously with the intent of trying to usurp Tutorial Slayer somewhat because I had gone through a lot of that personally and know how frustrating and boring it can be. So I wanted to create a system that was more engaging and interesting to interact with. Obviously, it had a lot of flaws, and that's why we didn't end up going ahead with it. But I do think there's still a desire there. I have a lot of ideas of how Slayer could be improved. I don't know if we'll get time to work on it at any point in the future, but yeah, there's definitely ways we could improve it.
Okay. All right. On the Twitter thread, I'm seeing a topic here from Wolves. He says, I really have no ill intentions with this, but why do you mostly create solo content or TOA? Do you not like PVMing with friends yourself, or is there more freedom in making solo content, etc.?
Um, I want to say it's not really up to me. Like I don't get a directive of just like make PVM content and then I just gravitate towards solo content every time.
Yeah.
It's usually, oh, we've got this quest, we would like a boss behind it. Can you make us a boss for it? And generally you're not gonna put a group boss behind a quest like that. It doesn't really work very well because you probably want the boss to be killed in the quest. So that kind of implies it needs to be solo because I don't think you really want to force players to group up for a boss towards the end of a quest. It might be quite awkward. Then that ends up making a solo boss at the end of the day. There was a lot of talks for DT2 of like, could one of those bosses be a group boss? Like, there's a lot of desire for that, but again, for the same reasons I just mentioned, it ends up just being kind of awkward to develop like a duo or a group quest boss. Obviously, TOA was a raid. It's got to be a group boss. I worked on Nex. That was a group boss. I worked on Fosani's Nightmare. That was intentionally solo purely because I think that fixed a lot of the issues that Nightmare had, and you could implement stuff differently in a solo encounter that you couldn't do in a group encounter.
Mm-hmm.
But that is a big point where creating solo content is infinitely easier than creating group content for a lot of different reasons. But we do want to do both. We want to have some group content. We want to have some solo content. Most of our players, admittedly, do want just solo content, but we can't just release solo content. There are definitely plenty of players there that really want group content and love group content. We'll definitely push for that when we can. Obviously, Voldemort Part 2's got a group boss, albeit quite mid level, but that's some group content. Perilous Moons was like pseudo group content.
Yeah.
So we're definitely not releasing just solo content. I'm sorry if the ratio isn't good enough for Wolves individually. But I love group content. I've done loads of Cox, loads of TOB, loads of stuff like that. It's got nothing to do with me individually. It's just a project we're working on and whatever we think is the best idea for that content.
Yeah. Okay. Thurko asks, what has been your favorite content release that you've worked on? Has there been any content update you've worked on that you expected the community to really like, but then it wasn't received so positively?
In answer to the first one, probably Mahogany Homes. It was like my first actual release, and Oh no, it's just really small. It's really simple. It's really cute, quite wholesome. I think it did what it needed to do fairly well, even if it might not be everyone's favorite training method. I think it's a fairly relaxing, chill way of just training construction, saving a bit of money, and had some quirky flavor in it. I just thought it was a cute project.
It is. I love it. I love mahogany homes. It's cool. And it
Um,
wasn't overly done either. Like it wasn't overly
yeah,
complicated. I think you just nailed it with just the 3 cities you go to. Which is like what 12 total houses or something. It's chill.
yep.
It's nice.
In terms of content that I was hoping would go down well and people didn't like, I think Nex is probably the one that probably still has the most roundabout negativity towards it. Hard mode Tob had like a bit of a mixed response, but the more people I talk to, people that have like done it a lot seem to quite like it. So I think that's probably gone down okay. Phosani's Nightmare seems to just generally get positivity around it outside of just, yeah, drop rates are still rare as hell, but kind of a separate topic. I think Mustard went down pretty well generally. DT2 bosses generally, like the bosses themselves, went down really well. Obviously, there's some drop table drama. Usually is drop table drama for most updates.
Inevitable.
Um, yeah, worked a bit on Coliseum, and that seemed to majority go down well. I think the biggest negative feedback for that was like the thematics and feel of it, and sometimes a bit of feedback saying it was too Inferno-like, which I understand. It's fair feedback. Not much we can do about that without completely revamping it. TOA as a whole, I think TOA. I don't know. It's hard to say. I think Nex is probably the one where. Thing is, for Nex, I didn't really feel like, oh, people are going to love this because I was like, we're backporting a fairly dated design. The directive was not to change it too much, so I didn't change it too much, and then people didn't like it that much. Like, there was a lot of criticism that it could have been so much more, and it was a bit underwhelming. So I don't know, but it's probably either Nex or TOA. People love TOA, and they definitely hit the mark for a lot of people. But I think the more dedicated raiders that love like TOB and stuff, TOA definitely did not hit the mark, and it was probably a bit of a letdown after such a dry period for such a long time. So maybe that.
Are you well there's I want to talk about drop tables, but before that, let's talk about raids 4 again just briefly because it's hard to even really say why TOA didn't hit the mark for some people. It's like sometimes I think to myself, I'm like, why do I like TOB more than I like TOA? I mean, TOA seems a little bit more polished potentially in some ways, but
I think it's
yeah.
because it's exhausting. I
Why
think
why is it exhausting? Do you know like specifics of why it is?
I think almost every boss demands quite a lot of like reactionary attention and is less like rhythm based and more so, yeah, like okay, now this mechanic happens, now I've got to engage for the next 3 or 4 seconds. You compare it to TOB, like there's so many rooms in TOB where you kind of just turn your brain off and get into the flow. Like Maiden, like you just turn your brain off, you see it hit 70, you freeze, kill a crab, attack, like it's just so kind of routine. And that's kind of what we were talking about earlier. Eventually, once you get good enough for the content, you kind of just turn your brain off a bit. But TOB still has that like looming pressure, right? Like if you get a little bit too relaxed, you're gonna lose a pillar at Nihilo. If you get a little bit too relaxed, you're gonna miss your freeze at Maiden. So it still has punishment, so it still feels somewhat tense. But I feel like all of the bosses, or most of the bosses in TOA, they require so much active attention, and they're really punishing. It ends up just making it really exhausting, where you don't really want to go in after you've done one. Like you want a bit of a break. TLB, you can just send them back to back to back to back. At least in my experience, that's
Yeah,
been my
yeah.
perspective on it.
No, you're right. I'm glad you like have that insight too, because sometimes I wonder, I'm like, what is so exhausting about these kinds of things? And you're right. I think, like you said, I think a lot of it is the rhythm. It's the rhythm, and once you get that, I think humans just naturally we just kind of fall into these trances where the rhythm is there and it's baked in, and the muscle memory gets baked in. Where over hundreds of raids, you really just get locked in and it's brain off. And I think almost every room in TOB has that rhythmic aspect. I mean,
Mhm.
especially Zarpus. It's just so chill.
Yep. I think there's also an element with the invocation system where it kind of enables like a really weird social dynamic where some people might not be comfortable with certain invocations, and then you end up with this like weird position of like, I don't want to turn this invocation off because I feel comfortable with it and obviously want the rewards behind it. But then obviously another person is like, oh, I don't want it on because I feel uncomfortable doing it. So then the social dynamic gets created of someone maybe having to try harder than they really want to, and then that means they might not group with you, or they might die or mess up or something, or you just kind of resent the fact that someone's joined your group and is basically lowering your GP per hour or whatever. And TOB obviously doesn't really have that. The worst you have with it is just like, yeah, I don't want to do 5 mans, I want to do 4 mans, and that is
Yeah.
a genuine negativity with TOB. I think the grouping and party scaling system at TOB is probably the worst part of it, but the actual content itself is fantastic.
Yeah.
Mm.
Interesting. So I'm assuming these insights are going to carry over to Raids 4. I'm excited to see, I think, learning from... I'm glad you guys still experiment as well. I mean, DT2 was another big sort of experiment thing. TOA was a huge experiment of adding modifiers and stuff. And I think all of those experiments that you guys do just, to gauge what works and what doesn't is inevitably going to lead to some better content in the future, where it's really like ironed out and just feels good across the board.
I will say that if I am on the next raid, whenever that ends up happening, it is going to be a lot more similar to TOB than the Red 2 raid.
That's exciting to hear, in my opinion.
Not necessarily in terms like the difficulty, but the feel of the raid, right? Like,
Yes.
I do want to push difficulty, and difficulty is a whole separate topic, but the feel of like boss rush and stuff like that, and cutting out the fat, streamlining it into the content that people really like, I think is what TOB did the best.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. It's funny because I think I even talked to you about this. I know I talked to Mod Husky about it as well years back, on our first episodes, of my personal desire, along with some other players, to, add puzzles, fun puzzles, engaging puzzles. And that's what TOA tried to do. I don't think it quite hit the mark. I think Kefri's the best example of it, something that's speedy and quick, that's puzzle-based.
I wish we just deleted all the puzzles.
Yeah,
I think the raid would genuinely be better if we deleted them. I think there's a big desire for variety because I do think it's a negative with TOB where it feels very linear and very repetitive. And personally, after doing 4 or 5 TOBs in a row, once I get to like Nihlocus, I'm just kind of sick of it. I don't want to do a Nihlocus for like the 5th time. It just gets exhausting. I really don't enjoy it after too long. And I think that's what Chambers of Xeric does really well, where each raid actually feels really different because the layout's slightly different. You're maybe doing 1 or 2 different bosses. That has really nice variety. So that's kind of what the puzzles are trying to accomplish in TOB, but I think they accomplished it in a bad way. And I also think we would have accomplished it better if we just deleted them and just made the bosses feel a little bit different.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think you compare like Bloat and Maiden, they are such different bosses. Well, if you compare something like Baba and Kefri, they kind of flow the same. They obviously have different mechanics, but the flow of the fights are quite similar. Like, you get the boss to a certain health threshold, special attack happens, dodge, 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 kill, kill, kill. You just mindlessly attack the boss again, dodge, 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 kill. They all follow the same kind of pattern, and that is due to the fact that I was creating 4 bosses at the same time, and probably a lot of the ideas just got melded and merged together.
Mm.
Yeah, I think TOB has bosses that stand out a lot more amongst themselves. Helps a lot with that.
That is a good point. And yeah, you're right. I think the puzzles, I think in theory, so many things in theory sound great, and then you start playing it and you're like, ah, this is exhausting.
Mm.
Yeah. I will say though, when when you have a dedicated piece of content that would be, I don't know about puzzle based, but movement based is where I want to lead. Hallowed Sepulcher is just phenomenal because it's not a combat thing, but it feels like a fun, fast paced. Just it's a really great update. Do you guys have any plans for more movement based minigames?
We really like them, and whenever we see the opportunity to do them, I think we will. I don't think it's like a conscious thing of going like we want a movement based minigame in the roadmap, let's put it in. But we're generally quite problem first, so which is the Guardians of the Rift. Okay, rune crafting is kind of miserable to craft. What can we do to kind of spice it up and make it a bit more engaging? that implementation could have been something more movement based. Obviously, it didn't end up going like that, but theoretically, it could have done. It's the same with How to Poker. Like, okay, so agility is a bit miserable in certain aspects. Let's try and make something that's a bit more exciting and engaging. That's obviously what Husky the Goat came up with. Yeah. We love movement. We all think movement's great. Most bosses have quite a lot of movement, especially I'm guilty of putting all this like permanent degens in arena, like uh, Leviathan and Muspa, and even the Colosseum. They do quite a lot with just putting like permanent like debris on the floor that you got to deal with, and that makes movement more interesting, right? Because it's like permanently evolving and changing it. It's not just like mark two tiles and between these two tiles over and over and over again.
True.
It makes it a lot more dynamic and interesting, and I do think people have genuinely responded to that quite positively. Those fights are quite fun. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm obsessed with Sepulcher. I think it's one of the best pieces of content that's come out, and it's just it made agility not feel like a skill. That's insane.
It really is, yeah.
That's such an insane
when that
feat.
came out, I
Yeah.
went from because I got to 92 before launch, and then I went from 92 to 99 in like a week.
Yeah, and it felt like you didn't
I
even
loved
grind
it.
it.
Yeah, it was wonderful. It was so fun.
That is the hallmark of a successful skilling update, where you don't feel like you're skilling anymore.
Mm.
Yeah, that's wild. Just the fact that that was possible. Now, of course, agility is one of those special skills that doesn't need to be, chop tree or, whatever. But I think you guys nailed it. And I think thieving is one of those other special skills. It's not technically a gatherer. It's not technically a buyable. It's just that middle ground, that weird. And I think thieving has a lot of potential. I think you guys have just touched that with Varlamore thieving, the house thieving, just little things like that, the auto pickpocket here and there if you're paying attention. I think there's elements, and I think thieving could be fully revamped into some really, really fun, engaging content that doesn't feel like you're training thieving anymore. So I need to bring this up. I always apologize to some of my audience that gets sick and tired of it, but have you heard of me talk about a gnome cube before?
No?
Okay, good. So this is the gnome cube was an idea that was brought up by it was a skill suggestion back like 2 years ago, before like sailing had been proposed as the new skill that was going forward. Somebody brought up the skill idea called mastery, and it was kind of like artisan but different. I think it nailed out some of the kinks that maybe artisan had. But one of the cool things toward the end was their reward proposals. And one of them was a gnome cube that just allows you to tick manipulate without a knife or a log or an herb and a tar, but just one item. Just one click. He called it a gnome cube. I became obsessed with the idea, so I started yelling about it on my rambles and casts and stuff, and I've just been obsessed ever since, because I personally think that tick manipulation, or just rhythm-based skilling in general, where you get the satisfaction of predictable resource extraction, not the running up to a Wintertodt brazier and waiting 4 seconds for anything to happen, but you get that satisfying rhythm of skilling. I think that is so good for the game, and I think so many players never get to enjoy the rhythm of things because there's so much APM behind so much of this stuff, like unnecessary APM. Where it's just like, why do we need to click an herb and a tar every single 3 ticks? Where we could really reduce that to just one click, or even in a lot of scenarios, just get rid of that entirely. I mean, a lot of PVM is rhythm-based that's not super high APM. You just look at Phase 2 Verzik, for example. You don't have to knife log every time you attack Verzik repeatedly. Like, that would become a chore to do, but you'd still get the good rhythm of 4-tick attacking. And I think skilling has a huge opportunity to become a lot more engaging and have a lot more rhythm. I think even Madalena had, with somebody else, has been kind of ideating with Game Jam of more sort of rhythm-based skilling that isn't high wrist strain. Anyway, so there's a lot of things I could go to. I love this rabbit hole I go down, but I know some people are a little bit concerned about going away from the herb tar knife log situation because they have nostalgia to it, or they think it's essential to have that higher APM for higher XP rates. But I honestly think something like a gnome cube could come out and be a very good thing for the game health wise, and just to get people into the enjoyment of I don't know, rhythmic skilling. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that at all.
So, if you not think that if we turned it into every time you click on barb fishing, assuming you did it in the right rhythm, it obviously succeeds. You don't feel like that loses anything?
So we'll explain that in a different way.
So right now, obviously, you click on the knife, click on the T-clog, click on the fishing spot in a certain rhythm, right?
Yep.
We could turn that into you get rid of the log, get rid of the knife, you just click on the fishing spot in the exact same rhythm, right? Do you not think that loses
that loses something? Now, the gnome cube idea just gets rid of the, in my opinion, unnecessary click of knife log. It would just be, here's a gnome cube item in your inventory that cannot break if you mess up the knife log and it turns into a teak shaft or whatever. It's something that is lower skill entry for those that want to get involved in some sort of rhythmic skilling like barbarian fishing. So I'm not saying all the methods need to become, you're not clicking anything in your inventory at all, because I do think you lose stuff with that. But I think what isn't lost is an unnecessary click. So the knife log is 2 clicks for only 1 action. And obviously that's always been the way to manipulate the skilling timer. But I honestly think at this point it's been so ingrained in the game to tick manipulate that I think it would be cool to just almost embrace it and sort of standardize it and allow an item to just 1 click it. I mean, we see it with the Salaster Spark. Salaster Spark creates a 4-tick action in 1 click, and it's so nice. And a lot of people have told me, I've made some 4-tick mining guides and other things with the Slasher's Bark, and it just becomes a lot less strain on your wrist. It's lower XP rates, but the difference, though, of having to click twice to just generate 1 action is it adds up over time. It's just a lot more clicking over time. Yeah. So that is my main proposal.
Anything like that. I'm not fully against it. It is just a grading scale, right? Like it does objectively make it easier. Have 1 less click, and that also means there's less accuracy required because you're obviously having to click 1 less item. Like it does objectively make it easier. I don't think it is a big deal, and it probably is better generally for the health of the game. We do need to care about our players' wrists at the end of the day. We want you guys to play forever. So having your wrist break after thousands of hours is kind of a problem. RuneScape's full of issues like that. Prayer flicking is obviously one of them. Yeah, I'm not necessarily opposed to it. Probably not Gnome Cube, but
yeah, no, that's the thing. It's branded as Gnome Cube at this point. So I say that as the term, but it could literally just be a new bark that comes from a tree. If it's a Salaster's Bark 2.0, it just generates a 3-tick thing.
I do think whenever we create new content, I think generally, at least most of the devs are aware of the desire for like sorts of high effort methods, right? And they're not going to just all be tick manipulation, but try and have them in different ways, right? I think what Mod Rice did in the Perilous Moons with like the little fishing mini game, you gotta like aim left, middle, right to catch the sharks or whatever. I think that's really cool, and I think something really big could come from that, and you could add more timing elements onto it and push that whole high effort, high reward ceiling. So I think there's a lot of elements there. We just try and not just rely on the herb tar really these days.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. There's so much that can just be rhythmic based without having to click something in your inventory every single time, but with the classic methods like mining and some fishing methods and even some woodcutting methods, just adding just a 1 click instead of a 2-tick really, in my opinion, is not taking anything away. It's keeping everything that's fun about it, which is the rhythm and the little bit of click intensity, but not adding an unnecessary click. Because on the other side of things, this is for those that are disagreeing with my take already listening to this, because there are some, it usually comes from the 200 mil community, the people that have already done these grinds that don't want anything to be devalued. That's generally the people that are against it, which I understand the devaluation, but there truly is nothing being taken away. And if you really like high APM, there's always ways to add extra APM if you want to sweat. So adding a gnome cube, you can also put feathers and darts in your inventory. Now you can just do a triple click instead of a quadruple click and still get all the benefit, but now you're getting some fletching XP on top of it. So I don't think, and just to make one more example, would it be more engaging? Would it be better for the game's health if now instead of knife log, it's now knife log? It's just fucking 3 clicks every time you want to do something. I feel like minimizing as many useless clicks as possible is just good for the game. So
classic Sae Bae agenda.
yeah, no, it straight up is. But when I get my J mods on, I want to I want to spew a few things. So actually, there is one more. This is not my agenda. It kind of has become my agenda. I talked about it with Mod Ash, but I'm gonna cross it by you really quick. Hardcore main man mode. So just hear me out if you haven't heard this.
Oh no, I generally am for this kind of stuff. I
Okay.
think there is a lot of unique gameplay behind the main version of hardcore.
But
It would be really interesting.
this even goes beyond it though, because this isn't in the main server. This would be a separate server entirely, where only hardcore mains are there. So complete restart. Everyone starts out level 3. Every single person you see on this new server, there's going to be a huge list of worlds because assumingly this is going to be a really popular game mode. Everyone has 1 life. And as soon as you die, you're kicked out of the server. So I just think the potential of it. I mean, I think of the wilderness. You're going out in the wilderness and everyone has 1 life. Like the fights, the clanning, the content creation behind it all is going to be absolutely riveting. You go to TOB with the boys, somebody dies to bloat, they're not locked in a cage. They're kicked out of the server entirely. It's just like the stakes are so high, and I just think it would be like the most addicting new game mode that could ever come out because it's a separate server. I don't know. I'd be obsessed with it.
I don't think it'd probably be the new most addicting game mode, but I do think it'd be very cool. It'd be very good streamer content. It would be quite unique in terms of like how it feels. But yeah, I can't imagine it'd be like mega popular or anything. But I do like the idea.
Yeah. You're right. I think I may be a bit jaded as well as a content creator, because creating content on a world like that sounds so much fun. But yeah, who knows? I mean, a lot of people that hear the idea end up thinking, okay, that would actually be extremely exciting, because you don't need to. It's not dead man mode. You don't need to do dangerous stuff. You could just skill and generate money there and swap over to the main game if you wanted. But oh man, I could just see the trolling too that would go behind this. I mean, you're just the griefing. I mean, it would be funny in a way. It would be so annoying. But like, if you're doing any form of content, knowing that every single person there has 1 life, if you see somebody AFKing, these people are going to start pulling like aggressive monsters over to try to attack somebody that's AFKing and stuff. Like, the whole world's going to be so unique, I feel like, knowing everyone has 1 life.
It would be more interesting if it was almost like a pseudo league where boosted XP rates, boosted drop rates, nothing else, no power or anything like that. Just to expedite it, so it's like less about the grind and more about like what can you achieve with those restrictions. Then it isn't really about like, yeah, okay, I'll go AFK for a dozen hours getting all these resources. It's like, yeah, you can bang through that really, really quickly, and then get to the more interesting, like risky stuff quicker. Like, it'd probably still have just as much appeal, if not more, for streamers, and probably would have a bit better, broader appeal. Like, people might be willing to try multiple times, right? The downside of all these hardcore game modes is like, it sounds really cool. You try it once, you die because of some random crap, and then you never try it ever again, right? You don't go for a second one. If you can create a version of it where people are willing to just go again, which they probably would be more so inclined if it was boosted drop price XP and stuff. And people might just see how far they can get.
So here, I'm actually going to push back on that, because I was thinking of that. I was thinking how cool it would be to have the boosted stuff, the boosted XP rates, the boosted drop rates. But then I thought, and I think you agree with me because you said it earlier on, the mid-game, the early mid-game is the most fun part of the game. And getting to that end game becomes pretty stale pretty quickly. And let's just say, I don't think I would play this way, but there probably would be a big group of players, that would be obsessed with this kind of game mode, that would want to do, for example, the classic nostalgic low-level PKing. So building up an account for, 10, 20 hours and going to the multi-Edgeville ditch And just knowing you have one life and clanning up with just some very, very low level accounts and just having fun.
Boosted rates would still enable that, right? Doesn't stop that
I think
happening.
the boosted rates would be fine, but the boosted XP, you fly past things way too fast. You don't even get to enjoy that really classic, charming, just 30 combat
It is a
status.
scale, right? Like
Yeah,
you make it 2x XP. It doesn't need to
it's
be
true.
16x XP or something. It could just be something, some speed up a little bit so people don't feel like it is such a slog.
That is true.
I think the end game wouldn't be boring in a game mode like that. Like if you're getting to TOB, like it's pretty exciting if you can't die.
Hmm.
There's going to be a lot of tension and excitement. I think people would probably want to get to stuff like that sooner rather than later.
I will say though, man, if all the drop rates were the same, if you get a Tebow in this hardcore mode, like that would swap over for just tens of billions, probably. I mean, just ridiculous amounts of money. So I think there is, I could definitely understand the boosted stuff, but in a way, even if it was unboosted entirely, I think that would be just as good. I think just the idea behind it still being the same game mode where everything has this crazy prestige to it. I mean, you pull a scythe. I mean, you're just balling out. Like you're the new Giga Chad in the game mode. I don't know. There's so much to it, and I think the way Mod Ash even said, doing a league version of that would probably be the way to go before you introduce a new world 345 where you just got this permanent dead server. Who knows if it'll be successful or not, but doing some sort of temporary game mode to try it out would probably be the move.
And if people like it, then maybe you make a permanent one afterwards.
Yeah. Okay. Dream Raid 4 theme or location. Do you have a dream for the location of Raids 4? Can you say anything about that?
No.
Okay. I'm just asking these Twitter topics. That are, I just see some. I know that you got to be careful with what you say, so it's totally fair. Let's see. Which leagues have you worked on? Which has been your favorite? And if you could add absolutely anything you wanted to the next league, what would it be?
It was just the last league that I've worked on. I've not worked on 2 or 3, only loaded. In terms of what I'd add, I don't think about leagues. You can kind of add anything. So much freedom. Like crazy. I've had loads of interesting relic ideas. I'd love to add a boss just for leagues, like bespokely made just for leagues, but hard to really justify it. Like, why wouldn't we add it into the main game? And then as soon as you start thinking adding it to the main game, it obviously gets a lot more complicated. So I just like the idea of a league's boss that's like purely balanced around a league and has different mechanics every league and and that's kind of part of the excitement. It's like, oh, what does he look like this time? What are the items that it drops?
Yeah, I mean,
It would be cool.
it could almost be like a Scotiza where it's like 3 rare totem pieces that come from any form of content, and you just go to this portal realm. Yeah, I mean, you guys did something similar where you had like 1,000 TOAs, right?
Yeah, we did. We buffed up like Chambers of Xeric, TOB, and TOA in different ways. Boosted drop rates, but made them a lot harder. A bit of variety.
One of the things I missed, actually, I want to touch on it, is just the drop table discussion. You're seen as maybe the JMod that has been a proponent of aggressive drop tables, like stuff that the average player probably wouldn't be aligned with. We talked about it earlier. You like the idea of things being very rare in some situations. I want to hear your thoughts in general on why, or just how you think in regards to drop tables, especially higher end game stuff, and where your philosophy comes with that. And I don't know, maybe where you think maybe could change your mind on certain things, but where you fall right now in the current state of the game.
Mm-hmm. I obviously see a lot of comments around this targeted towards me. Maybe not always in the nicest of phrasings, but I have prepared a little bit of a spiel on this, just because I do have a lot of thoughts, and I'd like to get them out there for full transparency, so people actually understand like where I'm coming from, as well as maybe helps them understand exactly how things work. Maybe they might not be aware of, but also just to kind of take you along the journey that I've been on for the past 4 years. Obviously, coming in as like a brand new dev and learning a lot, and obviously making mistakes and stuff. Yeah, I'll go through it. I apologize for anyone listening that if it comes off maybe aggressive or anything, I kind of just talk really abrasively, and I mean no miscontent or bad intent at all. And I'm just going to be kind of rambling a bit here, and it is quite an emotional topic for me. So yeah, I apologize in advance if it comes off at all badly, but I do mean the best.
All right, let's hear it.
Yeah, I'll be the first to admit that I've definitely made mistakes. Most of those have heard the feedback, and pretty quickly amend and try to fix any issues that I might cause. That's like too rare drop rates or bugs or whatever. Some of the are a bit longer term, where I've been like looking back retroactively and wishing I've done things different, which I'll go on to a bit. Drop tables are pretty difficult, but I do always try to listen to the community. I try to learn and improve for the future. I'd like to think I've at least followed through on that to some extent. I really don't want this to sound too whiny or anything, but it probably would. But goddamn, drop tables are just really hard. If I was going to pick anything individually that's the most difficult part of my job, it's definitely drop tables. I'd love to say that one day I'll get to a point where every drop table I release and work on is perfect. I'm not really sure that's a reality that can even be achieved. I'll always do my best to release what I think is right for the game. I'll listen to the community and I'll fix things if they're not good enough. Something that is a little bit reassuring, at least for me, that is if you look back across the years of Old School, it's pretty much always drawn around drop. I think that's kind of proof of how difficult they can be. Basically, no JMod has had a good track record of nailing them first time. Zora had loads of revisions, and that's really old. Vorkath still has its issues. Even things like Corp, which I think people have majority accepted now. We can probably all agree that the drop rates for something like Corp, which is fairly boring content, are crazy rare. The items aren't even really that powerful, and weren't even that powerful back in the day. As always, with every project, we try and listen to the community on what people want. We try to come up with a solution that iterates on previous ones to create something that we think people will like. Even looking at Nightmare, which is probably one of the most infamous projects for its drop table, started from the team at the time listening to players wanting more God Wars-like drop tables, appreciating that more rare drops with fewer consistent resources, since players saw the damage that things like Vorkath and Zora could do to the game. Obviously, that turned into a boss that had ludicrous drop rates for almost pretty middling items. Like, they weren't that powerful. And that drop table has had a lot of changes since it was released to make it more in line. Some of them, which I've been part of. Nightmare was obviously released before I was even at the company. Talking a little bit higher level, though, in my past 4 years of Jagex, the biggest things that make drop tables difficult to balance is one key fact. They have two majorly conflicting goals for success in RuneScape. So the one goal, and the most important goal, is that players feel sufficiently rewarded for the effort, time, and resources that they put into that encounter. No one wants to spend 50k a kill and 20 minutes of their life to come out with a Guam leaf. It just feels insulting, and every piece of content needs to profit for the player, at least over a long enough period of time. The second goal, and what makes this really complicated, is that content needs to be lucrative long-term, without devaluing other content in the game too much. Basically, it needs to be economically viable, and we all know how important the economy is in Old School. Even for Iron Men, as much as it doesn't affect them, they probably at least understand how important it is for the game as a whole. It's really easy to achieve just one of these goals. For example, if Corp's drop table only had the Elysian Spirit Shield and dropped no other resources, then its GP per hour would be purely dictated by the demand for the shield. It wouldn't hurt any other item economies in the process of people farming for it. This fulfills the economy part perfectly. Then you think about the actual experience of killing this boss. Kill after kill, getting absolutely nothing for thousands of kills, it would be really underwhelming and just not really worth your time. Then on the flip side, it would also be really easy to make mega lucrative drop tables with 10 unique items and loads of consistent resources and alchables. But then this would obviously have a significant effect on the value of those unique items and all the resources and alchables coming into the economy. This would have an effect on all other content that also provide those resources. For example, if a piece of content generated a lot of Ranarr weeds, then doing farming for those weeds would be devalued, and any other content that generates weeds would also be less valuable. It's really easy to have this sort of like resource creep in drop tables, where if you want everything to be, for example, 3 mil an hour, then maybe your first boss needs to drop 200 Ranarr weeds on average. Then that means Ranarr weeds are going to go down in value, and the boss might become 2 mil an hour over time. And then the second boss comes along and also wants to be 3 mil an hour. Now we need to drop 300 Ranarr weeds on average to match that, which then drops the value of Ranarr weeds even more, hurting both the first and the second boss. A lot of bosses are guilty of this and introduce more and more content. One example of this is looking at Chambers of Xeric and maybe Irrit leaves. Irrits were already not really worth a lot at the time of Cox's release, but what Cox tried to do was give you a flat GP value, for example 100k, and it would basically generate 100k's worth of Irrit leaves. Because Irrit leaves weren't worth a lot at the time, that meant it gave you a shit ton of Irrit leaves, which translated into generating a ridiculous amount of them, which even then further plummeted the value of that herb. This is something that's like really hard to manage long term because we obviously want content to be e.g. 3 mil an hour, otherwise it's not competitive with other pieces of content. But actually achieving that can have a lot of negative effects on the rest of the game. Coming back to the main point though, ideal drop table lives in the middle of these two extremes. Obviously, we want to give you something that makes you feel like it's worth your time, but we don't want to give you so much to the point where it devalues like all other bosses or all other pieces of content and like really drastically affects the economy. So I think TOA is a recent example of things probably being too generous, especially at the top end, where now quite a lot of those uniques aren't really worth a lot anymore. As well as the resources it brings in are very generous, and you can see the price of a lot of those resources have never really recovered since TOA's launch. You absolutely plummeted, and they're still struggling to come back. That's because it just gave too many resources. You need to find that middle ground of like, yeah, the players don't feel insulted and they feel happy enough about the resources that they're getting without causing really detrimental effects like this. And that's why it's so difficult. Before you take into account all of the different player point of views, scaling systems like invocations, group sizes, etc., we need to make sure we have a drop table that feels rewarding without being damaging. And sometimes we get this balance wrong, right? It's just very, very difficult. So this is why we often kind of have to just get it into a good enough spot, launch it, listen to feedback, iterate, and hopefully get it into a place that we're happy with after. Since I've joined Jagex, I've been part of a team responsible for almost every PVM update that's gone out. That by no means is saying that I'm the sole person responsible for every boss, mechanic, reward, drop table, etc. Definitely not at all. It's a very collaborative process with a bunch of devs getting involved. But it doesn't mean that I've been touching a lot of these things, and I think it's probably why people are probably putting my name towards a lot of these things. I've been around a lot of these projects, focusing on them for quite some time now. But the fact that I've also been on these projects repeatedly, I'd like to think that means I'm doing something right. Otherwise, I'm pretty sure leadership would have just rotated me onto their projects by now, which gives me a bit of confidence that my team at least believes in me, even if the players don't necessarily think so. Yeah, every project gets passed around a lot for perspectives on things like drop tables, mechanics, etc. Gets signed off by multiple stakeholders before we go ahead with it, and then we release it. Players will obviously find issues with it that we've not thought of, and sometimes those things are really obvious, and it's really embarrassing, to be honest. But such is life. Yeah, we're more than likely to listen to your feedback, look into fixing it and making changes. Later on, we'll obviously, when things have settled down, we'll have a retrospective, try and figure out how that mistake got past us, and then try and avoid that mistake of getting past us again in the future, and share learnings throughout the team. But I think one example I could probably walk through is how we ended up with the Vestige system at the DT2 bosses, and more so about like how it actually drops rather than how you create it into something later. But basically, the first thought was the players often get frustrated when getting super dry on items. Dragon Warhammer was probably one of the most infamous ones at the time. Obviously, a lot of players go for Warhammer. That means also a lot of players go dry for the Warhammer. A lot of frustration gets caused by that. Excuse me. So what we tried to do is the Venator shard system, where if you need to get the drop 5 times, but they're 5 times more likely, statistically you're less likely to go very dry. So that's why we tried the Venator shard system for the most. Players at the time seemed to really like that and agreed with the logic. I talked about it on stream and stuff. It got a lot of good reception. But they also give feedback that it's a bit of a shame that this means you never really get like one big drop. Like you just get part of a drop. Imagine you get a T-bow, right? And it was 10 separate shards. It wouldn't be nearly as exciting as getting the T-bow in one big drop. So then we moved on to the Vestige system for DT2, where we're like, okay, well, what about if we made them invisible? There's a proposal by someone internally. So then we tried it, and we kind of didn't realize that, yeah, this means that, like, day one, like, no one gets any drops. The economy sees 0 of them into the economy. We're like, oh shit, this looks really, really bad. It probably looks like the drop table's bugged. It probably looks like we've got a lot of issues, we're losing trust, we're losing faith, etc. As well as the fact that, obviously, this also means you can't really get lucky, right? Didn't really go down very well, so I don't think we'll really be trying that system again. But I hope that at least makes people understand like how we actually got there. It was with good intent that we trying to alleviate issues that we get and complaints that we get from players in different creative ways. Just sometimes they don't always really work. And I'm getting more and more feedback that trying all these new experimental things is getting a bit exhausting, and maybe we're better off just going back to the simple stuff again. I'm more than happy to try that again and see what people are like. I just wanted to try and do something different and try new systems that maybe people like even more, right?
Yeah.
Clearly, that doesn't always work. It's experimental for a reason. Yeah, Araxxor has a sire system almost, where you get 3 pieces in a row for the halberd, and you also get an item that you combine with a Zenite to create your new Rancor. It does just drop the boots by itself.
That's cool.
We'll see what people think about that. Maybe it's still too far in one direction, and then we'll make sure the drop system after that's maybe even more simple.
So
we'll see how it goes.
That's actually really good to hear, and I think you articulated that whole thing perfectly. Because yeah, I mean it's hard to know without the hindsight of what's going to be happening. So I think, in my personal opinion, I like the experimentation. Obviously, not just going crazy wild with some weird system, but coming up with something that actually seems reasonable and seems like the players would like. And I think the vestige system was a good thing to try out. I think a lot of players that are against it but kind of understand why it's there and see the positives in it really would have just liked a potential shot of getting lucky. So maybe a separate role to get the vestige, and you've probably heard that feedback before. I am curious, just because you mentioned the boots at Araxxor. So I can't fully remember. Are the boots going to negate getting stuck in webs entirely, like spider webs?
They kind of have a lot of effects, but the general gist is like, yeah, if you would have got hit by a web, it'll trigger a cooldown, make you immune, and carry on. So Arachnus, maybe every other web you'll be immune. For Urzik, it's not going to let you just run through all thousands of webs on the floor, but if you would have got stuck, it'll clear it once, right? So it gives you a bit of leeway there. Venenatus, it stops the drain for a bit. I think it drains your prayer and run energy or something. It has a couple of effects at Araxxor. It's a quirky little fun item. I don't expect it to be defining or anything.
Okay. Was there a reason why you guys didn't just do the full immunity? Was it too
I thought it just kind of made gameplay a bit stupid. Like if you just sat there during web phase of Urzik and you just didn't have to move at all, we thought that just felt a bit lame.
Interesting. I feel like, yeah, okay. I mean, I could definitely see the idea behind it. I just feel like if people are going to bring, because the boots don't have amazing stats, right?
They're not bad. They're not best in the slot, but they're a decent tribrid. They give melee strength, they give accuracy where appropriate. I don't think they give any defenses. Yeah, they're awful.
Okay. Well, one of the fears, I think somebody had brought this up, like ask Mod Arcane if they're gonna nerf the Ring of Stone because these new boots are coming out. I personally, I love the Ring of Stone tech at Arachnus. I think it's so great. So
No puns.
yeah, okay. What were your thoughts on that? I think port, cause, I mean, it had been out ever since Arachnus came out. I mean, the Ring of Stone worked there, just nobody really knew about it. I think there was like a screenshot of Port Kazard getting his pet like that year, and there's a Ring of Stone in his inventory, but nobody took any notice of it. But most players had no idea until just recently, like the past year and a half or so. Um, like, do you guys see like what do you guys think when something like that comes out? Do you guys kind of panic and like, oh crap, do we need to fix this, or do you guys just kind of let it ride out and just see what the effects are?
There's it definitely depends on the dev, but I do think generally there's been a bit of like perspective growth in the past couple of years where if players find something that's like very powerful or different that wasn't obviously intended, just try and evaluate and go like, do we think this is like healthy for the game in terms of like, is it circumventing anything in a way that now lets you get like 2 or 3 times more kills per hour? Okay, then it's probably not a good idea. Is it making like an interesting boss really boring? Is it creating a meta that's like really tedious or stupid, even if it's technically better? Like, is it a net gain in positivity, right? And I think for the Ring of Stone and Saragnas, it doesn't hurt the boss at all. It just actually makes it slightly more engaging in a way. Um, it's like axe skipping of Ardovras. Yeah, you don't need to methodically run around the arena and figure perfectly react to stuff, but it still requires timing. It still requires some skill. It doesn't really have any negative effects on it. So again, we're fine with it. And I think there's been a bit of growth in the design team and going like, yeah, we don't need to immediately shut down these like weird and quirky things, evaluate them and figure out like, is this correct? Obviously, like Soul Hera did, we've obviously found out that you could like kite it or whatever, and that completely trivialized the fight. It's not really just a quirky mechanic that people have discovered. It's like no, it completely ruins the entire fight. Like it makes it brain dead. So we patched it out. But sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes it's just a nice little cool thing the players like. Similar to Muspa, right? The step back method where you can avoid the melee damage.
Mm-hmm.
We did patch that out because it was a bit buggy, but then we reintroduced it later in a bit more of a functional way because people liked that interaction. They thought it was a cool interaction with the boss.
Yep.
So I think generally we're a bit better at stuff like that instead of just panic getting rid of anything that we saw was unintentional, which I think is good. But yeah, it's case by case.
Okay, so I want to kind of move on and ask about your, I guess, personal views on the game, just in regards to updates that you would like to see, updates that maybe, or pieces of content that you don't like personally that you would like to see get updated, maybe old content or whatnot. Is there anything that comes to mind that you focus on a lot? I feel like every player, every dev has their passions in the game and things that they would really, if they could have the power to just fully remove something or fully add something. What speaks to you in the game that you would personally love to get updated, but maybe just don't have the time or it's unreasonable to even pursue?
In terms of things that I focus on, it's definitely just been PVM ever since I joined this company. Like I did Mahogany Homes as like my one skilling thing, and then I've pretty much been on back-to-back PVM projects since then, for better or for worse. But that's definitely been my focus. I do enjoy it, so it's not exactly a bad thing. In terms of things I'd like to add, I'm a massive advocate for like one-time completion like bosses. So kind of similar to Inferno, um, that where it's like, yeah, it's just one really extravagant encounter. That's definitely not what our target or most of our players want. Like we generally want grindy bosses. We want generally we don't really want like really hard bosses. Most people aren't really a fan of that. They'd rather have more bosses like a Kraken or something that can brain dead grind eventually, which is fine. I'm happy to create stuff like that. But
Mm-hmm.
like selfishly, I'm a massive Souls like player. I love all those kind of games, like massive, like fantastical bosses, crazy complicated and stuff. I'd love to create some really over the top boss fight that takes players like weeks and weeks to figure out and fully master. Like that's just my guilty passion. I'm not sure if I'll ever get permission to make something like that because 3 people completing it's probably not worth our time. But I'd love to work on something like that.
Yeah.
In terms of things I'd like to remove or update, don't think there's really anything that's like screaming to me. Uh,
That's good to hear,
I've got a
actually.
lot of ideas. Got a lot of ideas for Slayer, mostly because Kieran just prompts me late at night, like, "What can we do with Slayer?" And I'm like, "Okay, let's have a thing." Um, Random Kieran thoughts. But
You know what? Because you brought up Slayer, gonna interrupt you. Is I love Konar Slayer. I love something that drops lootable crates or keys or stuff like
right,
that.
yeah.
So if there ever does come a point where you guys add a new Slayer master or some sort of new Slayer system that has some sort of stackable crates or whatnot or caskets or some fun thing like that, or even it doesn't even have to be Slayer. It could be the dungeons. I love killing stuff in the catacombs and getting totems that you stack up and you can kill these fun things. I think that stuff is extremely fun. And even mini games like Guardians of the Rift and Temperos and Wintertod have these crate systems. They're just it's just something extra. I think it's always fun. So that's the stuff I
Agreed.
really like seeing.
Um, I think in terms of bosses that I would want to update, probably Abyssal Sire. I think it's a cool fight. It's just a little bit too janky. I'd love to like tidy that up a little bit and just make it flow a little bit nicer.
I
It's
I have
kind
a
of a minor thing.
I have a couple thoughts on that again, just to butt in. But I think what would be cool for the vents is you guarantee max hit the vents. So if you have a shadow, you're gonna guarantee one shot him. If you don't have that high of DPS, I think what the vents are like 30 or 50 HP. I can't even remember.
It's kind of what I mean, right? It's kind of what I did for Sani's. It's like there's just
Yeah.
certain parts of their fight you just want to smooth out and make them a bit more consistent.
Yep.
And I think the events being like really inconsistent and you got the weird pathing. You want to equip certain weapons, which can be okay, but can be janky at certain like progression levels of your account. Um, and then yeah, there's other aspects of the fight that just feel a little bit unclear, a bit frustrating. And there's a lot of good there. I'd want to tidy it up. I think.
Yeah, that would
Uh,
be great. What are your
quite a
Yeah, no, go for it.
was gonna say I'm quite like a tech nerd. Like there's a lot of like code bases I'd love to just clean up and tidy up. Like, I think the skill guide system and the level up messages or something just so manual and dated and ugly, and it's just so easy to mess up and just forget things. I'd love to just go through and tidy all it up, but that's not player facing at all.
Yeah. I,
A
I
lot of
was
those things in the code base.
What are your thoughts on like nulled damage? Is there, I'm gonna mention. I mean, actually, Sire doesn't have the null damage. If you hit something, well, actually, I guess in some situations it does. But one of the most egregious examples, I think, is Nex, where it has these guaranteed thresholds that you cannot pass. It'll phase. It'll null all damage. Do you think that is good? Was there intention behind it because of massing potentially? Like what?
No, we hate it. It's kind of just a easy way of stopping the boss breaking.
Oh,
Because
okay.
that's what we had on launch. We didn't null damage originally on launch, but then in a
Oh,
mass where you got 60 people all Ruby Bolt specking, the boss just kind of broke. Or like, okay, we kind of need to stop this. Then we implemented it like that. It's definitely not the most graceful implementation. There's a lot of other ways we can do it. They're
yeah.
better. But no, we generally try and avoid those where possible.
Okay, because yeah, null damage feels bad, and I always thought I didn't actually know that it didn't do that on release, but I was just thinking it would be so cool to be able to coordinate, one big Ruby bolt spec, if you had enough players, you just bypass an entire phase, if you had a good enough coordination.
Mm.
Just think the little mechanics like that would be cool, but okay. Well, Mod Arcane, I'm going to ask you one last question before we wrap things up. And that is, who has been the most influential person slash dev slash person you look up to in regards to game development? And I guess one more question on top of that is, what can we look forward to seeing from you as a developer in the future? I guess in regards to, I don't know, just your philosophy of the game or, potential, I don't know, ideas that you have for the game going forward in the next 5 or so years. As I don't know how much longer you're planning on being on the team. Hopefully for a lot longer. I love having you on the team. But yeah, just a couple questions. Most influential and just future plans for the game?
Yeah, no plans to leave it anytime soon. I still absolutely love working at Jagex, and I couldn't imagine a better job. So yeah, no intents going anywhere anytime soon. But in terms of influential person, definitely Mod Kieran. He's absolute figurehead in the team, and I think he's been a massive influence to me, as well as most probably the designers and probably the old school team in general. I'm not going to say he's objectively the most influential designer ever in Jagex, right? But he has done some pretty incredible things about like revolutionizing like how we actually work, how we think, fostering an amazing team, making sure we get the right people in and stuff. Like, he definitely is really up there. I really hope he never goes anywhere because he's amazing. Um, in terms of future stuff from me, I don't really know anything really. I got loads of ideas for bosses. I got loads of ideas for rewards. Loads of ideas for mechanics, systems. Just getting the time to work on them. Right, there's always something to work on. Can't really talk to any projects in specific.
Yeah. Do you do you like I don't know. Do you enjoy being able to be mysterious, or do you wish you could share certain things? But no, it's just for the better of the game to not share it. Ideas that you have.
Yeah, there's. I think I don't think there's any harm sharing my ideas, and I could definitely just sit around for 3 hours, like going through all the random like mechanic ideas. I don't really know how fruitful it would be.
Mm,
It's like they're really abstract ideas, and they might not work. Like
yeah,
a lot of my ideas don't work, even the ones that get into game. Where it's like they're just a cool idea that I tried out in a boss, and maybe it's crap. I don't know, but I've got lots of ideas of things to try. The inspiration's definitely not run dry or anything. In terms of projects, I'd love to talk about them, but yeah, that's definitely not for the best of the game.
yeah.
Marketing would be very upset with me if I spoiled absolutely everything that I'm going to be working on. So can't really do that.
Okay.
Yeah, I could definitely talk about just ideas for projects. Obviously, Game Jam comes around twice a year, and I try and get a couple of my ideas out then.
I love game jams. Game jams have come a long way. They always just get
I
more and more exciting over time.
I can't remember if it was in a Game Jam blog or not. It might have been, but I created what I thought was a really cool project in the last Game Jam. I think it was called Impelled Down. I don't know if you read the Game Jam blogs or anything.
Remind me what that one was, because I do read most of them.
If I Google it, it doesn't seem to come up if I Google it at all. So maybe it wasn't in the blog. I don't know if it got cut or something. But it might be in Varlamore. It might be getting merged into that. It was a it's proposed as a hunter minigame where you have like a top-down view and like there's a giant abyssal portal like leaking imps into the world. And the imps are just coming down these lanes to escape into the rest of Gilnor, and that's kind of the source of all the imps in Gilnor. This is actually where they come from. A
Mm,
giant rift that's been opened in this like a random cave, and it's just this wizard struggling to keep it closed. And he's like, "What do I do? What do I do? Help me, etc." And it's your job to obviously like capture them and keep them and stuff. And I created this interesting little mini game where you get a top-down view, and you've got like this grid in front of you, and you basically like click on tiles to almost secure them. Like you almost create like a little trap, but you gotta click like on the north, south, east, and west tile to try and trap an imp in the center tile. And they're walking down from like top to bottom, so you gotta like kind of time it. They're like walking down. You time your trap, you line it up, and it's like really fast paced. I think it's really satisfying that what I've done. It feels really responsive because you can click multiple times in a cycle and it'll register them all. Because I got this engine command for it, which feels really cool. And it ends up feeling just like this really fast-paced, responsive minute game where you just click on all these squares and you're lining them all up, and you got these little combos and patterns and stuff. Um, it's hard to really describe. Like a GIF would describe it all, but I don't really have a
yeah.
GIF to hand.
That
If that was in the Game Jam blog, that might have explained it better than I did. But it is a really cool mini game that I think I worked on. It feels very different. But maybe that'll come out. I don't know.
that'd be cool. Yeah, I'm trying to imagine it almost. One of the other minigame ideas, just to, uh, I think there's. I don't know if there was a game jam on this or something, but I do remember there were some kind of talks on like some sort of tower defense in RuneScape. You know, it is a tile-based
Oh yeah.
thing, making some sort of tower defense game, mini game in it. But see, it would be so cool to do something like that because I don't know, it's almost like a game in a game. You know, mini games sort of feel like a game in a
Mm.
game, but man, a tower defense, it's like you're not even playing your character anymore. You're just actually having a separate thing entirely. But who knows how that would work out? Have you ever thought about doing something like that?
I've actually done a game jam project that was literally a tower defense game. So yeah, I have definitely thought about it.
Yeah.
The biggest question to answer with all these, like the gameplay loop, I think it would be fun. Obviously, tower defense is pretty much solved at this point, so we could definitely just do it in RuneScape. The difficult part of all of these is like making it fit. Like, what is it
Yeah.
trying to do, right? Is
Exactly.
it a new training method? Like my hunter thing could just be a new training method, but for something like tower defense, it's not really combat. Like, should it scale off your gear? Like, does it use your gear at all? Does it use your skilling levels at all? How does it work like that? Do you want to just get 99 on your skills before you do it? Does it have its own entire progression for like 5 or 6 different skills? Then all of a sudden, the scope of it's huge, right?
Yeah.
What rewards is it giving? Like, is it purely centralized to the minigame when you just get rewards for that? But then why are people doing it? Right? Like,
Yeah.
people are trying to figure out the place for all these like games within a game is really difficult. Uh, yeah, I would love to. I think the gameplay loop is solid. Same with the roguelike, like I mentioned. I think something like that is solid. It's just hard to imagine like what does that mean for the rest of the game. For a roguelike, you probably don't want people to bring their own gear in. And that feels kind of bad because then all of your progression for your character is kind of irrelevant.
Yeah.
Like, how does that work? We want people to go in at level 3 and just like do an entire minigame and get rewards based on like having max gear. Probably not. I mean, you want it to scale. They don't always fit with the systems that we have in the game.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's kind of hard to figure out. Who knows? There's so much potential for the game down the road. I think
Mhm.
just endless creativity that could be introduced. All right. Well, Mod Arcane, I appreciate you being on the team. I'm a huge fan. I hope you're here for years to come, and I just wishing you the best on your projects that you're working on. Very, very excited for Araxxor coming out. Obviously won't be doing it right off the bat, but I know so many people are looking forward to it. So I hope it's a banger. I'm sure it will. But thank you very, very much for your time today. Hope the audience enjoyed it. It's nice, short and sweet. This is considered short for me, 2.5 hours. I guess it's like average length, but this is a good time to wrap up. So thank you very much, Mon Arcane, for your time today.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
All right, guys, if you guys want to follow Mod Arcane, I'll have his Twitter link down in the description. You can also support the cast through Patreon or a YouTube membership link down there. And thank you for listening, and we'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.